Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. This is one of my original Word Balloon guests going back 15 years. Good Lord. That's how long we've known each other, B. Claymore.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
It's hard to believe.
I know, man. 15 years, good Lord. But it's really good to see you, and I'm sorry it's been so long. But I'm excited that you've got a new book and a genre that I think I've always enjoyed your stuff, going back to Hawaiian Dick back in the day. I think that was probably the first thing of yours that I was aware of. But now it's Aftershock and Miles to Go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I just today I just got comp copies of the book, and it looks great. It's got them right here, actually.
Oh, excellent! You know, I've got images from your conceptual or from your artist's conceptual art. That cool. When we're talking about the story, we can kind of look at the characters and stuff. But God, man, again, you found another great artist, and I'm sorry, again, his name is
Stephen Molinar.
Stephen Molinar.
He I've actually known Stephen for, maybe close to 15 years. He's just one of these guys who's been around a while, and we've talked in the past. Hi, HP. We've talked in the past about working. Actually, you know Seth Peck.
Sure.
Years ago, Stephen and Seth and I were trying to put together something. We wanted to do an image that was there's an old Golden Age hero named Golden Lad, which was a Morton Meskin. You know Morton Meskin?
Love Morton Meskin.
Right.
Massive.
It's a Morton Meskin thing, yeah. And we had this idea we were going to revamp this character like in a modern context, which it's probably been done a lot since then. But anyway, we really spent some time on this pitch, and it's just kind of one of those things, like we had it all kind of lined up, and then it just kind of happens a lot. Guys get busy and do this or that. But I've been in contact with him over the years off and on. He's done some Star Trek stuff at IDW.
Oh, wow.
And then actually he and Tim Seeley did a book at Vertigo together called Imaginary Fiends.
Yes. Great book. Yeah, sure.
Which Richard Pace did the covers for, or at least a couple of them. But and you might not, if you hadn't seen anything Stephen has done since Imaginary Fiends, he had always worked in a really slick style before, very much so in Imaginary Fiends. And for this book, he really loosened up and kind of went to town with a brush, and which I really encouraged. I'm not going to tell an artist how to work, but he's great with acting and expressions and character moments and stuff. And I really encouraged him to feel free to just kind of get a little looser with everything. And I think the work is, it's the best stuff he's ever done. And he's also coloring the book.
I was going to ask. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So he's got, and he's got kind of free reign to kind of use the palette that he feels comfortable with.
I'll let you here. Go back and pull up the book again, and there we'll.
I know I'm holding. I guess I could have shared the screen, but
no problem. Well, like I said, I've got. Go ahead.
Yeah, he and with input from. Whoops, almost.
Yeah, no
spoiler alert there at the end. But with Mike Martz and Christina Harrington's input, we've put it together, and very happy with it. And like I said, I just got the books today, and it's heavy cardstock cover. Francesco Francavilla did this alternate cover for us. Francesco, again, been great friends for years and years, and have never really worked together. We've talked about it in the past, and so I asked him. And the second issue, we got Jeremy Hahn to do a variant cover for us. So it's. I mean, when you've got friends that are that talented and have been around that long, you might as well. And again, like Jeremy and I haven't done anything together for years after working together quite a bit. Bad Karma, the Kickstarter we did a few years ago, but
but also Leading Man and
back in Leading Man, Battle Hymn. We did a GI Joe thing together.
Forgot about that. Very cool.
Yeah, and we're Jeremy and I are tight. We're in contact.
Yes,
all
sir.
the time. So it's funny that I was kind of going down the list, and I was like, well, why not? And Jeremy was doing some other things for Aftershock, and he did a really cool cover for the second issue. And he and I, it's like Leading Man, for example. That's one of those things that a lot of people who might see this or tune in or watch it later may not even be familiar with the book because it's literally like 15 years old now. We did it at Oni Press, but it's one of those things that's always in play with media.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, tell people about, and we'll get back to Mouse to Go. But Leading Man is a great, truly. It's on. As I said, you and I have known each other 15 years. I met you and Jeremy around the same time. John Glapian was another guy that I met around that time as well. Jason Latour. And and now again, I'm thrilled for you guys all, and really, it's been fun watching your careers evolve and be on the sidelines like that.
Yeah, well, and I think that goes back to you being a Chicago guy. I mean, some of the first, like Mike Norton was one of the first guys I knew in comics before either of us were doing much through. Actually, I'm not sure how interesting any of this is to people, but
they know these names, and again, it's cool that everyone's friends like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I met Mike through Jay Torres, and Jay's the guy who actually dragged me into comics to begin with, and so I got to know Mike and obviously Tim and the Chicago crew. And so we always feel like I'm in Kansas City, Seth Peck is in Kansas City, Jeremy's Kansas City adjacent, kind of just down the road.
Sure.
Alex Grecian is in Topeka, in Kansas City we got Kyle Strom and Jason Aaron and Scotty Young now. Speaking of Chicago, and Dennis Hopeless. So.
Yeah,
he's still here, but we always think of like the Chicago guys. It's kind of like, they're 8 hours away by car, but it feels like they're kind of like a part of the Midwest branch. And then in St. Louis, and you got Cullen Bunn and Brian Hurt and Matt Kent and all those guys. So
absolutely,
it always feels like a kinship between that kind of Midwestern flyover state with so many guys in New York and California, or whatever. So
and between C2E2 and Wizard Chicago back in the day, and
Wizard Chicago,
Planet Comic Con in KC, and all those shows and stuff. No, absolutely, man. And again, I those gangs of creators and stuff. Yeah, everybody gets along. It's great when everyone's together and we all hang out and everything. Again, I'm not a creator, but I'm adjacent. I'm comics adjacent. So
we all kind of came up through Image at that point. Like Wizard World Chicago was kind of the show we all congregated towards. Rick Remender and Tony Moore and God. So those days makes me feel old thinking about some of the late nights we had in Chicago, and then in San Diego.
And we got off on a tangent. But Leading Man, a great concept that you and Jeremy had. Yeah, tell people about that.
Yeah, so the Leading Man was it's a great concept in the sense that it's an obvious concept. Like I tell people, especially aspiring creators, the ideas that get the most traction are often the ideas that people think they've heard before, or it's like, well, that's so. The Leading Man is just very simply the idea was, what if this international superstar actor who shoots all over the world and travels everywhere is that's a cover for this spy organization that he's a part of that goes all the way back to the origins of Hollywood, right? So like we kind of implied that James Dean and Marilyn Monroe might have been involved. I mean, the idea, we were like, well, there's all these mysterious deaths and it's a great cover. And not to be cynical, but like immediately we were like, well, this is also an idea that, it feels like So like the idea is always to be able to do the comics you want to do. If you've got a property that you think other media will be interested in, it doesn't necessarily mean you're pandering to that media, but man, it makes it a lot easier to be able to do what you want to do, right?
Sure.
And so right away, the leading man, like Hawaiian Dick got attention right away from media. I mean, it's a 50s detective story with supernatural elements set in Hawaii. There was no part of me that when we came up with that, Stephen Griffin and I, that I thought, boy, people are going to be beating down the door for Hollywood. but very quickly, I didn't know what to do because, working for Image, you're doing everything yourself. And I've got all these producers and people asking me about it. So that's kind of where I got my feet wet in the whole Hollywood thing. You don't know sometimes, but with something like The Leading Man, we thought it was pretty obvious. And right away it was optioned by Universal, optioned multiple times. People who are interested in it have a lot of weight. So years later they'd come back, and we literally haven't done anything with the concept since that original miniseries at Oni. And it's been on my mind lately because again, it's a thing that's kind of in play again. And
that's great.
And Jeremy and I are very much like, it's just one of those ideas that's so obvious that it's like you've got it in your back pocket. You're like, someday somebody's going to put a whole lot of money into this thing. And Jeremy and I have talked about, doing a new series or taking the old series and kind of fine tuning it, and playing around with the concept a little more.
From a comic standpoint, is it back to you with you guys to take to any publisher you want, or even put it out on your own?
Well, it's complicated. So it's an Oni book,
right? And nothing wrong with Oni guy. I like the Oni guys,
right? It's no longer with Oni. Oni kind of fractured a little bit some of their production elements and their publishing elements, and now they're associated with Lion Forge. So
yes, indeed, absolutely.
So the book, for all intents and purposes, it is with us. But some of the people who've been involved from day one in terms of media are still involved.
Okay.
So, and some of the people who are interested in it are still just keep getting more and more traction out there to the point where they have the ability to kind of pull us in with them, and we're glad to go along for the ride because over the years it's been such a fun concept to play around with. That we've there was a period in time where we tried to tailor it for a specific actress who was in a TV show at CBS. Jeremy and I went out and hung out on the lot, and we fine tuned it, came up with it. That fell through for various reasons. It was going to become the leading lady, and a lot of creators. And I understand why they hate dealing with all that stuff. And, a lot of guys just want to sit down, do their work, leave me alone, let somebody else handle it. But I enjoy it. I mean, there's so much bullshit involved, but that going in, I mean, that's kind of part of the fun of it. I mean, I spent years in sales before I was in comics, so it's not like I'm not used to, the spiel. Anyway, so, and even Hawaiian Dick, it was optioned years ago by New Line, and then I'll answer that question right now, Scott.
Exactly, man. Good timing, Scott Pollard. Very nice.
Well, let me just first of all, let me lay out Hawaiian Dick right now because it's complicated. So, Stephen Griffin and I created it. We did 3 issues. The 3rd issue of the first series was Crazy Late, which set a tone for the rest of the book. It was extremely well received, well reviewed. It was kind of one of the first new wave Image books, which had everything to do with Eric Stevenson, who was very into pulling, new, interesting content. In fact, that book and the way I promoted it led to me working for Image for a while as their PR and marketing coordinator, because Eric and I had the similar sensibility that Image could become like the HBO of comics, kind of, which it very much has become.
Absolutely.
And 15 years ago, just because of the structure of Image and the way it worked, it was just a matter of convincing creators to kind of take the leap and understand that the only risk involved was their time.
This is before Robert Kirkman, just a couple of years, but it was before Kirkman in 2009 having his what we call the manifesto and saying, "Hey guys, this is what you want to do with your career. DC and Marvel is not the final stop." Right. It's the middle stop, and then take that audience with you in a creator-owned period. And again, I remember this period of Hawaiian Dick, and that's one of the reasons why I got excited about comics again because yourself and Jeremy, and then also Rick Remender and Tony doing Fear Agent, and a lot of interesting books were coming out around that time.
Well, in terms of the timeline, Hawaiian Dick actually one of the things that screwed us up right out of the gate, and again, this is so far back, it's not like pointing fingers or blaming anybody else because we always had control over it. But originally the book was supposed to come out in January, and we were working on it. Well, that was when Image was about to launch this new superhero line, which was Phil Hester and Andy Kuhn's Fire Breather. Jay Faerber was doing, I guess, Noble Causes.
Noble Causes, the superhero soap opera, absolutely.
No, I think he was doing Venture, actually.
Excuse me.
Right, Venture, yeah.
Okay.
And then Kirkman with Invincible. And there might have been a couple other books. So they asked us to bump up a month to December. Well, we shouldn't have done that, So we got the first 2 issues done. And then my collaborator, Stephen Griffin, is in Australia. And he's doing the art, first comic book he'd ever done. He's doing the art, the color, the lettering, the production, most of the production.
All the heavy lifting, yeah.
Right. And so we got behind early. Second series came out shortly after that, The Last Resort. There was a huge gap. In fact, I found some of the old issues, and I was looking at, that was a 4-issue series, and I was looking at the 3rd issue and the 4th issue, and they have completely different trade dress because it had been over a year, and Steven had kind of recreated. So, like, if you look at the 2nd issue, the stock is different, the title logo treatment is different, and the 3rd issue, it's
wow,
yeah, and then Screaming Black Thunder was the 3rd series, which was supposed to be an ongoing, which Scott Chantler drew.
Yes.
Even colored, lettered. And we thought we'd take some of the burden off Steven. He was going to do the covers and then color it. Well, then he decided he also wanted to write, draw, and color a backup feature. And we got slogged down again. Didn't become an ongoing. We had solicited the 6th issue. Never came out because we just ran out of. I mean, the best we could have done is release the 6th issue months after the 5th. You can't do an ongoing that way. So then we sat on Aloha Hawaiian Dick for about 5. It took us about 5 years to get that done with Jacob Wyatt drawing. Now that book did come out on time for 5 issues, but that's because we took the 5 years it took us to do. And in the meantime, I did the Hawaiian Dick Kickstarter, which is 4 years late. Which was really a case of me. We had done the Bad Karma Kickstarter 200-page book with a lot of moving pieces, and it wasn't quite finished when we put it together. We kind of used that as motivation to get it finished, but we didn't have nearly as many moving pieces as I had put together for what became a 100-page hardcover, which Ryan Brown talked me into instead of 60 pages. A number of calamitous circumstances occurred related to technical issues, people involved in the project, personal issues that I don't really want to get into, but
no problem.
But so that book has been, so I have basically put a moratorium on any Hawaiian Dick stuff until that book is finished and out the door and in people's hands. And I have to finish it. I mean, you can refund people money, but we've spent a lot of money putting what we have together. And ultimately what I want to have is this great book that is specifically for the people that have supported it. But in the meantime, so in fact, a few months ago, a publisher asked me about Hawaiian Dick and if they could do a new Hawaiian Dick book, pay a rate, which would have been great. But I was like, I can't leapfrog this thing that's sitting out there like everything always is with Hawaiian Dick. So once that's finished, which, I want it to be ready to go by the end of this year and then get it out.
That sounds great.
And then what I plan on doing after that, which I haven't really talked about, is and it's funny because Stephen Griffin has had issues of his own in Australia. He's been in and out of contact, personal issues that are his own to discuss. But we got back in touch after very little contact over the course of a couple years. I would now and then I would contact. He's in Perth, Australia, so it's hard to So anyway, I would talk to his mom or his sister now and then and see how he was doing. And anyway, he's sort of re-energized and we're in more contact again. He's not drawing right now. He's writing a little bit, but he plans to get back into drawing when he's good with it. I know this all sounds crazy, but it's there's nobody I enjoy working with more than Steven, because his creativity is it's unlimited. Like, he's got this thing where he wants to do everything his own way. Like, he earned 3 Eisner nominations for the first 2 Hawaiian Dick miniseries for Best Colorist. He had 3 Eisner nominations after coloring a total of 7 comic books. And on top of that, he was nominated for the Russ Manning Newcomer of the Year Award for the first series, because he was doing this digital watercolor stuff that 15 years ago just leapt out at people.
Groundbreaking, yes.
Right. And he did that in Flash. I mean, nothing about it was normal. So then when he came to color the 3rd series, people had kind of started to catch up to him and do that. So he recreated this really lush watercolor effect for the 3rd series, which really, as it went along, he really found his footing with. And I'm like, what you're doing is great. But for him, it was always, well, no, people are doing that. You know what I mean? And so talking to him again and kind of, looking over some art of his that I haven't, he's got a few Hawaiian Dick pieces that we haven't ever used that I'm going to use on the Great Big Hawaiian Dick. And then I really want him involved in anything in the future. I mean, he co-created the concept,
totally,
and always co-own it.
Totally.
So yeah, anytime like TV or Hollywood or anybody comes knocking, he's got to be involved. And that's sometimes when I'll go searching for him, because somebody will be interested in it.
Yeah, dangling an option. Absolutely, man.
Yeah. So anyway, what my plan is to get the Great Big Hawaiian Dick out the door. I would like, if Steven's in a good place, I would like to do an omnibus with all of the existing previous to Great Big stuff, which is, I don't know how many pages it would be, but I would, but Steven designed the trades and everything. He's so good at design work and all that. And I would love to have him.
It would be 3 miniseries, right? All the stuff before Great Big Hawaiian Dick.
4 minis. 4
minis. Wow.
It would be Hawaiian Dick, The Last Resort, Screaming Black Thunder, and then Aloha.
There you go. Jesus. Yeah.
Now, like, the Screaming Black Thunder stories were 16 pages long, which nobody really noticed. But there's backup stuff, and Jason Armstrong, Shane White, Sean Crystal.
Yes, Sean. Wow.
Yeah, Paul. So there's guys that have Chris Bruner colored Sean Crystal's backup story. So we'd want to put all that in there, but I'd want Steven to design it. So I would want that to kind of be like chapter 1. And then I've got an artist that I've talked to about doing a new Hawaiian Dick series once everything's lined up. And well, I mean, I'll just tell people what my plan is. I mean, my plans don't always come to fruition, but so Aloha ended in 1954 with Bird, the lead character, and his Girl Friday partner, not his girlfriend, but Kahami, ready to head back to the States to deal with some shit that Bird had left behind, right?
Because it is 1954 and it's before Hawaii was
right, exactly.
It's still a territory in the Hawaiian Dick universe, if you will.
Right. Yeah, and there was a subplot when we were going to do an ongoing series. There was a House Un-American Activities Committee subplot that I did use in the last 2 series that I kind of wrapped a little more quickly than I wanted to. But so I did a lot of research on because the FBI because Hawaii was a territory, there was persecution of communists in Hawaii, and because Bird had been in LA, I wanted to kind of do this whole. And I did a little bit with it, and I think I wrapped it up pretty well.
He was disgraced. Anyway, he was disgraced in the States, Bird, and then went to Hawaii to kind of.
All we knew was that he killed his brother, and that his brother was somehow involved with organized crime, and that had led to him being disgraced and washed up in Hawaii, where he joined his old World War II buddy Mo Kalama.
Yes,
and then in the last series, we introduced a third brother. Named Mike, who was just kind of a ne'er-do-well. Anyway, but if you're a fan and you've read it, you know that they were going to head off to the States, and we would recap that. But what I want the new series to do is to pick up in 1960 as Bird comes back to Hawaii after whatever has happened in the States. And what I'd like to do is kind of echo the origins of the book from the beginning, which is to say it's friendly for new readers because we've kind of reset things. Again, we will allude to what might or might not have happened when he was in the States, and it's clearly affected him. But I would like it to be a thing that old readers could pick up and new readers could pick up. I was done with it. With the nightmare with the Kickstarter, I was like, God, let's just, let's put Hawaiian Dick aside. I mean, I'm always doing something else, but it's just that thing that people that know me, and
Clay, it was a great book. It was a great concept. You and Stephen put a lot of really interesting ideas and design together.
We loved. I mean, it was the most. It's kind of my baby in the respect that we just. It was the first big project that I did, and it worked out way better than I would have. I didn't know Image would be interested in it. I mean, we were talking about doing a black and white book at a smaller publisher, but Eric Stevenson really jumped on it. We could have done a better job, obviously, of.
Well, as you're getting older and you're both, I mean, that's the thing, man. I'm sure you feel you're a much better writer now than you were 15 years ago or so. And also, no, it's such a great concept. And it isn't an obvious concept because, I mean, right. I always think about retro. And if I had your any writing skills beyond making sports articles, as I did for many years, or writing commercial copy, my dream would be to write a retro book. And if I, could find an artist, that would be the kind of stuff I'd want to do. I don't know how commercial that is, but for whatever reasons, I think the mix and everything, and also getting into the tiki culture of the 50s, and you guys really leaned into that. And that's great kind of kitschy kind of, I think, passion.
That's the thing about the book. Like you mentioned that, it was one of those books that, when you saw some of these things that people were doing, that we were doing, it got you involved. I mean, I've had creators who kind of followed. I'm not saying they followed me, but they, in the wake of what, when Kirkman and I and Rick were trying to kind of do stuff at Image that would attract attention and kind of point in a new direction with The Walking Dead and all the stuff Rick was. Rick threw a lot of projects out there before. Sea of Red and
Nightmare, Sea of Red, absolutely.
Strange Girl and all this stuff.
Strange Girl, definitely.
Yeah. But that did open the door for people to kind of be aware of what they might be able to do. And I've had, it's always gratifying when somebody who followed us into Image says, oh, finding that book on the shelf that wasn't quite like other things. And I realized I could do, it might not look anything like what we were doing, but they realized they could express themselves more commercially. And
absolutely,
my thinking was always, if it appeals to me, it's got to appeal to somebody out there. So, but yeah, the tiki aspect of like, for instance, what's his name? Great. Used to be at Lone Star. He works for Diamond now. Wow.
Was that the guy who made Tiki Joe?
No. This is crazy. It's a friend of mine I've known for 15 years as well. I might just blanked. Anyway, he opened like a little tiki bar, and got into kitchen tiki in his basement because Hawaiian Dick had kind of led him in that direction. Doesn't even mean he was a fan of the book as much as it kind of opened his eyes to that whole subculture.
What's that great tiki bar right by the Stevens Center in Rosemont in Chicago?
Yeah, Hala.
I'm so glad you're getting up to look.
The Halakahiki.
Yeah. And God, man,
it's amazing. I mean, I'm assuming, I hope it's still there. I haven't been back for years.
And certainly with COVID, I'm really not sure, Clay, but I love that place. And I went a few times subsequently, especially when I lived close by in Des Plaines, Illinois, which is another Chicago suburb, not too far from there. And no, it's a blast because there you go. And man, I'm telling you, it was, as you know, the walls were all like lined with like bamboo and stuff, and you felt like you had walked back in time.
That's because it is vintage. I mean, it's been there for 50 years.
Oh, there you go. And my parents loved, they had little tiki kitschy things that they had picked up from the 60s and stuff like that. So yeah, man, no, you're right. And that's the thing. There are dad bars, and I love dad bars being an old man. Oh, nice.
I've got all kinds of and Hawaiian Dick led me even further into the tiki kitschy culture and stuff.
Sure.
Now, in Hawaiian Dick, it was always meant to be an accent. more than, I mean, I never wanted the book to be cheesy.
But no, it's a straight up noir with a dash of supernatural.
Right.
And
we're
again,
creating our own world.
I think a great exotic setting of Hawaii pre-statehood.
Yeah.
And I think that really, it was another intriguing element of it in terms of, and God, you think of, the classic Westerns and stuff and, California and Oklahoma. Nice. Oh, there you go. Fantastic.
Yeah. That for me.
I like all the paraphernalia. Absolutely. But no, that's the thing, man. And it was like, well, here's 20th century statehood. And literally you're only talking about Alaska and Hawaii at that point. So I think those are intriguing backdrops for stories about the states before they were states.
Not to get, and we can stop talking about Hawaiian Dick, but
we'll get back to Miles to Go. It's all good.
Not to crawl too far up my own ass, but my thinking with my pretentious sort of thematic thinking with Hawaiian Dick was, I've always been, and I also want to kind of talk about the retro thing a little bit too, because that has, as much as I enjoy doing it, it hasn't always done me favors career-wise.
Okay, all right.
When you get pigeonholed doing something, people assume that's what you do.
Yes, I understand. Sure.
But my thinking was, so I've always fascinated by the dichotomy, and this would have, before, thank you, HB, before, and also I know 15 years ago wasn't a million years ago, but this would have been before our current circumstances, and really before there was this kind of weird conservative call for, the good old days, kind of, if that makes sense. But it plays into that because my thinking was always, well, we know the 50s were not a good time to be anybody but
white.
A certain segment of the population.
Yeah.
But not even white, in fairness. I mean,
well, white in either middle class or upper class.
It was right, and it was easier to be middle class. You could be a working man and make a good living and own a nice house. You could aspire to that, which
absolutely
is not really a thing you can aspire to now.
No.
But at the same time, there were, I was born in West Virginia, and my dad's grandfather was a coal miner. That those people were left behind. They were living a rough existence at the at the hands of the corporations that were controlling things. Obviously, to be an African American in America was not easy.
Yeah, to say the least, absolutely.
If you were an Asian American, if you were Japanese American, you're still coming out of World War II.
Absolutely. Yes.
So obviously, we know all that, but on the surface, it was Leave It to Beaver and
Bright Ike, yes, indeed.
Yeah, bright travel posters and and this booming economy and everything, which was an element of things, but that was also very much almost culturally propaganda from the top to the bottom of the corporate level to the top to the bottom of the government level. That's not to get too heavy with politics, but that's what people seem to be wanting to return to. It's not reality. What they want to return to is the facade that everything's fine and we can push the people who are suffering aside as long as we, keep America great when things aren't real great. So I thought, well, Hawaii was a great sort of.
We'll embrace it.
I thought Hawaii was a great kind of analogy for what must have been going on in America because our perception of Hawaii in the 50s is this hula girls and Pan Am and bright travel brochures and everything. But obviously, there's a native population that might have been sacrificed to some degree for that, and there would be back alleys and crime and dark doing. So for me, it was kind of like a microcosm of the larger society, which I guess maybe there is some more relevance of it today as we, as so many people today are trying to ignore the horrors that are going on, some of which are really nobody's fault, and just pretend like things are okay, So that was kind of my underlying conceit, which if you don't perceive that as you're reading it, that's fine. It's just something that was always kind of in the back of my mind. And as the book went on, I tried to, the Aloha gets pretty dark. If you've never read Hawaiian Dick, it ends on a pretty down note. but that was also very much me just struggling for so long trying to get this damn labor of love out the door. Jake Wyatt drew that miniseries and probably, with Paul Reinwand actually drew the last issue over Jake's layouts. But by the time Jake was done, he was a completely different artist. Thomas, believe it or not. Yeah.
This is audio as opposed to video, but it's all good.
She's right. Thomas is right. So anyway, but like I said, I do want to, it's stupid not to, I need to get all my ducks in a row with the stuff that's outstanding. And then, my goal from now on with anything is to make sure, because it's happened more than once, and that's one of the things when you go in at Image, when Image is kind of your entry point, you're kind of on your own. I mean, there's a lot of reliance upon you to get the damn work done. You don't have deadlines. You're not, you're making any money you make is based on what you produce and how much you sell. So it's unfair, I think, in retrospect for us, for myself and Steven and Jason Latour and I with the Expatriate and even the book 76 we did.
I was going to bring up 76. I love that.
Yeah,
go on.
I think it's unfair for us to have sort of used that as a proving ground and then left readers hanging because we didn't market it correctly or finish it the way we should have or what have you. And that happens all the time. Obviously, things get canceled if they don't work out, and that's part of the game. But we could have done better than we did. And again, this is 10, 15 years ago. We could have done better than we did. We did 76, didn't get finished. The numbers were terrible on 76, but people who read it loved it.
Yep.
And, again, 12 years later, I still talk to Ed Tatum, who's now directing animation, who drew that book, and he's just gotten better and better as an artist. We still both want to kind of figure out how to wrap it. You know what I mean? Take the stories we had, finish it, and figure out how to get it out there. Because we loved what we were doing and people responded to it. And it makes you feel, I don't think this happens with a guy who was doing a Marvel book that was canceled after issue 6. I don't think 12 years later, people are like, hey, what happened to the Iron Fist, whatever. But when it's a personal project that people really connect to on that level, I mean, I go to conventions and people ask me about these books that barely anyone read from 12 years ago that weren't wrapped. And you're like, it's not a gold mine for me to get that thing done, but if you responded to it, maybe we could figure out how to do it right, repackage it, and then.
I certainly also play because there really are a lot of great ideas that you and your collaborators have come across that, for whatever reasons, didn't click at the moment, but I really do think a lot of them would. Leading Man, for example, God, think about it. Van Damme had it didn't make it as an Amazon series, but Van Damme had a pilot at Amazon that essentially was the same concept.
It kind of freaked me out a little when it came out too. I'm sure we were in the middle of trying to do some stuff with it. And I was like, oh,
yeah. And again, I mean, and also, no thought of somebody stealing your idea per se, but I mean, it's just in the zeitgeist, and it's like, okay, somebody else thought of a similar idea. I always point out Alan Moore said that the invention of the steam engine, Americans, we all think of Robert Fulton, and I don't remember the Italian inventor that came up with the steam engine around the same time, but certainly the world wasn't connected the way it is now. And it was just kind of a natural conclusion of these inventors to kind of reach the same ideas and stuff. Right. So that's, again, so that could happen creatively as well.
And it happens. It's not just me. I mean, I know it happens to everyone. I've like Alex Grecian asked me recently if I'd read Brubaker and Phillips' pulp graphic novel, and from Image, and I said I hadn't. And one of the reasons I haven't is because I find that Ed Brubaker, we have similar sensibilities on things, and I was talking about another project I was working on when Alex asked me that. And I kind of froze for a minute. And I'm like, why did you just ask if I'd read that? Because when they did the Final Cut, was that the name of the Hollywood thing they did? I think. The thing they did.
The Fade Out.
The Fade Out, right? The Fade Out.
Yeah.
I had been pitching this 30s era Hollywood writer project. I'd pitched it to Vertigo and a couple other places. It was called Hack, and it didn't. I remember Will Dennis at Vertigo telling me, well, why don't you think about making this a novel, because the mystery readers, cozies and different niches and everything, which is actually how Aldous Grecian started as a novelist, was turning a comic book project into the Murder Squad series that did him extremely well publishing. And I kind of had that in my mind, and I was like, but I just kind of dicked around with it and didn't do anything. And then I read that The Fade Out came out, and I was like, oh, well, shit. I mean, it's like, oh, look, Ed and Sean are doing what I wanted to do, way better than I wanted to do. And it totally, there's no way I could have pitched a thing with that unique a setting and kind of world. So yeah, it's kind of like that. And so, like, there are writers I have a hard time reading sometimes because I feel like I'm on kind of the same wavelength, and if they're doing it better, it's annoying. And if they're doing something along similar lines, it kind of kills your enthusiasm for something else. So.
Judd Winnick came out with Caper, 15 years ago for DC, and it was one of those focus books that Dan DiDio was trying to get going. And I remember Bendis saying, "Oh shit, I was all set to do my Jewish mob story, and Winnick beat me to it." And it's like, yeah, I mean, these things happen, absolutely, man. So no, I get it. Or Seeley would never read World War Z, Max Brooks, because and for that, or rather, that was Kirkman and Max regarding that, and vice versa. Brooks wouldn't read Kirkman stuff, and or Seeley avoided Buffy for years because he kind of felt with Hatch Slash,
people will ask you, they'll say, "Have you read the?" You'll pose an idea, and they'll go, "Well, have you read this? You should read this." And I'm like, "What? No, the last thing I should do is read something that's close to it, because then so." But no, that's, and that thing about shared sensibilities, I'm not comparing myself to Brubaker, whose production and productivity and partnership with Sean Phillips is staggering and intimidating. But you do find, like, I was always a big James Robinson fan, right? Like Starman was the book that kind of kept me into comics when I was in college, and and the Golden Age. Then I went back and read Firearm. Well, I didn't think about it at the time, but I connected so much with all this work, and it really kept me engaged. And like even Starman, I had a letter published in there before I was in comics, and they used to publish your full address. And I was in college, and I got like these letters from like France and these people that connected with the book as well, and I thought it was really cool. But then I'll tell this story. I don't know if I've ever told this story before. So again, Starman was the seminal influence. Watchmen hit me between the eyes. I hadn't really gotten into Warren Ellis' stuff yet, because his Wildstorm stuff kind of turned my head around. But Starman just blew me away. I mean, it was like everything I wanted in a comic book. So when I got into comics, I started working for Image. I had done, as soon as I'm working for Image full time, I'm dealing with, I'm talking to these guys, these creators that are working with Image, big, people that you've admired and respected, and it's cool, it's not like fan worship, but it's just, it's cool to get to know these people. Well, I had done a short story in an anthology that was basically self-published in Kansas City by a writer who's no longer in the industry for good reasons. And nobody read this book. And I wasn't real happy with the way the story turned out. It was kind of a personal story that I liked as it had been written. The artist was a really talented guy, but he kind of short. He didn't put, parts of it were great, parts of it weren't. He just kind of fell apart doing it. So it was one of those things that nobody had ever mentioned to me. It wasn't distributed, I don't think, through Diamond or anything. It was a Xeric grant thing so he, the writer was a hustler, and I'm sure he sent it out to a lot of people. But
Xeric grant, for people who don't know, that's Eastman and Laird, the Ninja Turtle creators. They had created the Xeric grant, which was a way to fund creator-owned books. You would pit, essentially it was like a competition. Competition. They would read your pitches and stuff, and they would give you the money to make your book. And I thought that was an incredibly philanthropic thing that the Turtle guys did as a thank you to the community, and understanding that, hey, it's tough making a book, and we're going to help you out.
Well, and it's funny, this and this particular writer would sell that book as a Xeric Grant award-winning book, and to the point of where you'd be like, okay, at a certain point, all that matters is the book. You know, it's like that's not
right. That
gets you to
the front door, but let's see the book.
Absolutely. Well, I remember Seth Peck always saying, you know, the primary requirement to get a Xeric Grant is that you can't afford to do the book. He's like, so basically, all you're doing is telling people that, you know, I didn't have any money anyway. But so anyway, long story short, that was the last. It was the last story in this book. I had kind of forgotten about it to the point where like he gave me copies of it, and I didn't even bring him to shows or anything. So one day when I was working for Image, I get this email from our production guy, and he said, "Hey, is it cool if I give James Robinson your phone number?" And I had never dealt with James at all at this point.
Wow.
James had just come off of, he kind of left comics, and he did The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen
and Comic Book Villains, another movie that he wrote.
Screenplay. Yeah. The Comic Book Villains. So he was starting to dip back in. He did, I guess, Leave It to Chance after that. But anyway, I was like, oh shit. Yeah, Thomas is right there. The Paper Museum was the name of the book. And I was like, oh yeah, James Robinson, you know, I mean, I'm dealing with, you know, I'm talking to Warren Ellis and, you know, all these, you know, and all the Image guys, you know, Rob and well, not Rob at that point, but, you know, but James was like, oh shit, you know, and so he called me, and I kind of gushed a little, which, you know, and I remember telling him, I didn't know why he's calling me, and you know, and I'm like, oh, I had a letter published in Starman, and I remember him saying, well, you'll have to excuse me, I don't remember every letter that, you know, it is like very gracious. I'm like, well, no, I'm not saying you should remember. I'm just telling you, I didn't, you know, I that's how much I
Sure.
So he tells me he had gotten a copy of Paper Museum, which in and of itself shocked me. And he read my story and wanted to make a film of it. And I was like, what? I was like, nobody saw that. I've hidden it from people. And he was like, no, it's really, and I really like the story. And I know these guys from doing League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think I can get some assistance with effects and this and that. The kicker is at the end of the story, the artist had it's about a spy who comes across an old girlfriend. And then at the end of the story, we see that these agents are chasing him through the neighborhood. The artist, without talking to me, had drawn monsters chasing him through the neighborhood at the end. It's a side note. I was like, whatever. So I'm like, Jesus, yeah, of course you can, you know, you can make a short film of this story that I've forgotten about. And he was like, you know, I'd rather keep managers and agents out of it. I'm like, whatever. You know, he sent me a script that he wrote, which, God, I hope I still have somewhere. But anyway, it was flattering. And so,
wow.
Long story short, when I finally met him in person a couple years after that, we were at a DC party, and I was like, James, we had talked a few times, but I'd never heard a follow-up on the film thing. And we met, and I said, you know, a couple years ago, and he said he made the film, and he said, but he couldn't afford to do the effects for the monsters at the end of the film, so it was never finished. So I'm like, you know, but I mean, you know, anyway, and from there, for me, that was just like, wow, you know. And then, of course, a few years after that, I get a message from Tony Harris, who co-created Starman, who I did not know at all, just out of the blue. And literally, the first communication I had from Tony Harris was, hey, would you want to co-create a book with me called the Further Adventures of the Whistling Skull and Brickfist? And I went, yeah. I mean, sure, but why? I mean, you know, I didn't. Well, it turns out he had approached Kirkman, and Kirkman was like, it's kind of pulp, old school stuff. You know, you should talk to Clay about it. So eventually that book became
Whistling Skull. The
Whistling Skull, tied into the JSA Elseworld stuff at DC. So eventually I got to be friends with James, and I co-created a creator-owned book at DC with Tony that, for reasons unrelated to the book, didn't work out the way we wanted it to. But anyway, that story, my point about that story is that I was such a fan of James's, and James was always complimentary of stuff I did. He loved Hawaiian Dick. I mean, like DC one-shots I'd done, I'd hear from him.
JSA Classified, you did that great Wildcat story.
Right, yeah, JSA Classified, yeah, that Ramon, that I brought, I had to drag Ramon Perez in. DC had to convince them to let Ramon Perez do. I know, dude. I had no power or pull at DC. That was the second thing I did with the Superman story that I got Phil and Andy to draw.
Great story. Another great story. Absolutely, man.
But I knew I wanted to use Catwoman, and I knew Ramon, he's a genius, and I knew he'd be great for it. But they resisted it initially because they thought his style was too stylistic. But he was very much, he was in that Darwin kind of adjacent Darwin Cook. They knew they were, and like they told me they wanted to use somebody else who was a fine artist. But I was like, Ramon, I know you don't, you're not dying to do this, but I had him redraw the character a few times, and they finally let him do it. And so that story with Ramon's art and Dave McCaig's color, if you ever find it, don't even read it. I mean, it's such a beautiful story. But what I realized finally with James, I was so flattered that this guy that I idolized, who did these brilliant books, was such a fan of my work. I remember him talking to me one time about DC when he was kind of back in the saddle there, and how he was like, I don't understand why you and I aren't the guys here, with our brothers, Jeff Lemire, and these guys doing this and that. And I knew it was, I think Dan had some issues with my work. I mean, I was always doing some stuff there, but it was like pulling teeth. Anyway, it finally occurred to me, the reason James is such a fan of my work and I'm such a fan of his work is we have the exact same influences. So
sure,
it's almost like, like Firearm and Starman were literally just a distillation of all of his pop culture fanaticism, all of which was stuff that I loved and grew up on. So part of me was like, it's less about him thinking I'm a great writer and more about him being like, this guy likes the same shit I like. You know what I mean?
Totally. And also growing up in different countries.
Oh yeah. But he was so clearly influenced by noir and American detective fiction, and even James one time. This is just kind of it's late. This is kind of just descended into
this is James Robinson's time, which I was absolutely, because I love James. James is a great guy and he's a brilliant writer. I miss him coming on the show, but we've had many conversations over the years at conventions and on Word Balloon. So yeah.
So he called me one day, and he was in line at Starbucks in I don't know where. I think he was in Seattle maybe at the time, and he had this early '70s Northern Soul tune that he had the melody stuck in his head, and he couldn't remember who it was. And he was like, "I thought maybe you would know what I'm talking." And he literally, it was like, this kind of not a super tuneful hum, but he kind of described it to me a little bit, and I was like, "Okay, I'll try to figure it out." But I made it my mission to figure out what that damn song was. And I spent a while kind of thinking about it, thinking about the era. And a couple hours later, I found a YouTube video for this song, which I can't even remember what the title of it was. Okay. I looked it up not too long ago, it was a completely obscure song that I had, vaguely remembered. And I emailed him a link on YouTube, and, I didn't make any money spending 3 hours trying to figure this damn thing out, but he was just blown away because that was the damn song he was trying to think of, And so I was like, yeah, that's right, Then I thought, well, shit, I don't necessarily need to be the guy James Robinson calls in the middle of the night trying to think of, pure Northern Soul songs. But again, it just goes to that kind of shared.
Yeah, no, kindred spirits, man. Rob Burnett, the director of that movie Free Enterprise from back in 1999.
Oh my God, dude.
Rob and I are always like on each other's wavelengths in ridiculous ways.
Wait, you still know that guy?
I'm talking to him. I've known him for 5 years. We just talked 2 weeks ago, and we had a conversation, and then realized we've been talking for 4 hours. And he's like, "Holy shit!" But yeah, we remember the same obscure 70s and 80s shows that bailed after 5 episodes or whatever.
Okay, you want to hear a convention story? So
Sure.
That guy cornered me. So the WWE wrestler Nash.
Yes.
7 foot right. I don't know what else he's gone by, but Nash was at Wizard World Chicago, which might not have. It might have just been Chicago Comic Con. I don't know.
Was it Kevin Nash? You're talking about Kevin Nash?
Yeah, Kevin Nash.
Yeah, sure. Gigantic. Played Odin in a throwaway Thor movie.
Right.
The Asylum.
7 foot tall, big dude. Right.
Oh my God. Yeah, he's a monument. Absolutely.
He's throwing a party. Well, actually, we're in Knuckles. For those of you who don't know, Knuckles was this shitty little sports bar in the hotel adjacent to Wizard World Chicago. And Wizard World Chicago was in Rosemont, which is not Chicago.
Right. So it's right by the O'Hare Airport.
Right. It's by O'Hare. So you had the option of going to that bar, going to a Mexican restaurant named Maria's, or taking a cab into Chicago. Those are your options.
Or jumping on the L if you wanted to.
Yeah, or you can get on the L if you wanted to. Which
sure.
So
hilarious.
Now and then we would go to Chicago when we were at the show, but generally everybody would congregate at Knuckles and then head out to the lobby, and that was kind of the scene. So we're at Knuckles one night, and it's winding down, and this dude with a dog collar on stops by our table, and he goes, I can't remember who I was with, probably Jay Torres and maybe Norton, and he goes, "You guys want to keep partying all night?" And we're like, well, yeah, sure. He goes, all right, Nash is having a party in Suite 312 or whatever. So you guys get your asses down there. There's beers and babes. And so, convention adventure, we're like, so we go down into the suite and Nash is there quietly kind of having drinks and talking to people. And there's a bunch of, freaky people hanging around. And then at I don't know what time, they're like, we're moving the party to like one of the panel rooms or something, like a ballroom or something.
Oh, funny.
Which is really just Nash getting everybody the hell out of his room, and they Anyway, I ended up in a corner with that Free Enterprise guy.
Right.
I'm a marginal Star Trek fan, but for some reason he zeroed in on me like we had the exact same points of reference. And I spent 2 hours in a corner with him telling stories, and he kept referring to me like I knew what he was talking about. And it was 4:30 in the morning before I wandered through the tunnels back to my hotel. But last time I've thought of that guy, it's funny you say that now, because I just remember sitting there the whole time kind of cornered where you couldn't get away. I mean, okay, no offense, but I was like, 3 hours ago, a guy in a dog collar asked me into a hotel room, and now I'm against a stage, and it was, anyway, it was, and yeah, that was a rough next day at the con when I finally made it to the. In fact, I know I was rooming with Jay Torres, who's a writer at the time, because I remember we shared a bed and he had built a wall of pillows between us. So when I got to the fold out bed, but
that's hilarious.
Anyway, it's just that's what you should do at some point, is have all of us that used to hang out at like Knuckles and the lobby at Wizard World back in the day tell these ridiculous stories about stupid shit that happened back then.
2 months ago, 2 months ago, I had this thing. That I did not want to be called John Con, but they insisted, so it was.
Sure you didn't.
I really didn't.
You wanted it the Central Show.
Exactly. But it was great. And we basically created after-hours atmosphere, and it was during San Diego Con Online. And because we were all bummed, once again, another Hyatt, lobby hangout. And it was great. We all just hung out, and we all told stories, and it was fantastic. And it was this great chill thing. We're likely going to do it again sometime at the end of the year. And again, this is great. And truly, I love that tangent. That was fantastic.
Do you remember, this is the last tangent. Do you remember the worst convention I think I've ever been to that was only made, enjoyable at all by the company we kept, down in Orlando at the FX, I think it was FX show. And it was a terrible convention. Nobody bought anything down there, but they put us up. It was me and Seth and Jason Latour and Jeremy, Matt Kent, Brian Bird.
That's when I fell asleep during our Bad Karma panel.
That's right. Yeah, we did a panel,
which was no reflection on you guys. I was totally jet lagged as far as you.
For anybody listening, we did a panel. This show was terrible, but they flew us down. They put us in this like old Miami Beach style '80s suite. And all those St. Louis guys were there. Colin was probably there. So and we're all Chicago guys, St. Louis guys. Like I said, we're all friends. So we just hung out all weekend and kind of tolerated the show with nobody buying anything. But at the time, some of us in Kansas City had created a virtual studio, and it was we had great plans. It was me, Seth Peck, Jeremy Hahn, Tony Moore, Jason Aaron, and Jason Latour. And because Latour was couch surfing in Kansas City at the time.
Touring the country, exactly.
Right. Tony Moore was living in Kansas City at the time, and we had big plans. But anyway, so we did a panel, and it was just Jason, Seth, Jeremy, and I think. There was nobody in the panel room. No audience at all. But John was going to record it for Word Balloon, so we had to do this panel. Hillary knows what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, Knuckles. Exactly, Hillary. You got it.
Hillary Barta. It's nice to have a genius show up. So there was nobody in this panel room, but because John was going to record it, we had to do this damn panel.
Well, and that's the thing, because I'm like, I always say that about conventions. It's like, don't be down if there's only 10 people in the room, 20 people.
Or only no people.
We had no people. But as I said, the good news is I got literally thousands of people listening. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, well, anyway, John fell asleep during the
literally, I'm like,
and so not only do we not have an audience, our moderator was asleep.
And Clay, exactly. He's like, "So you're gonna sleep through the whole panel, John?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sorry."
Which I pointed out, and he was mortified about. But
hey man, it's not
even memorable. I can't remember anything else about it. Except
find it on the Word Balloon feed, everybody. It's there. I think it was 2009 or something like that. But yeah, those FX shows. I'm so glad you brought up because quickly. They tried. I mean, those were autograph shows, and Mark Hammond, in fact, who's with Comics with Art Franco and runs there.
Yeah, and Mark's a great guy.
Absolutely, and with the best intentions, was like, hey, we should add like comic books to our autograph and celebrity show, and it just, I mean, really, they tried it for 2 years, and it was a decent effort. They got great creators, Azzarello and Darwin Cook and Jason and Hickman, and I mean. Really like made an effort and like Matt Wagner. I mean, that was the great thing at both of those FX shows from a networking standpoint. That's really when I got to know Matt Wagner really well, and we became friends because of those shows.
I was down there. Did I do two? Was Hickman at that show? Because I remember hanging out with Hickman and Ron Salas and Ben Templesmith and. Were they at that show? I don't know. It
was 2 different years.
And you're right. It was because the second show, Seth and I had a hotel room together, and he woke me up at 3 a.m. after I'd been out, to tell me that he went to pet a cat out front. It turned out to be a raccoon, which he was thrilled about. Which is the kind of thing you don't need somebody waking you up at 3 a.m. over.
And I don't know if it was which year it was, but one of those years we were at this great resort, and the elevators were like ridiculously slow, and I wound up in an elevator with Adam West. And it was just me and Adam West. And it's literally going like the speed of an hourglass. I mean, It's so goddamn slow. And literally in the perfect Bruce Wayne, Adam West voice, he's like, "Gee, I hope this thing doesn't break down on us. I mean, my God, I was in an elevator like this last night. I felt like it was in here for 5 minutes." And I don't know why, but just in the moment, I'm like, "Don't worry, Cape Crusader, we're gonna make it to the bottom."
Jesus, John.
And he laughed and he smiled and he said, "Thank you, citizen." And I'm like, I have had my Adam West moment. I'm very happy. His agent was waiting, and he's like, "Nice meeting you." And I'm like, "Great meeting you, sir. Fantastic." So, and then I had an encounter with him another 8 years later. But those are my 2 Adam West moments. But yeah, it was fantastic. But George Takei was there 1 year, and he was great. And then we were all congratulating him on the TV show Heroes.
Right.
He was the Asian guy's father and everything. So we're like, "Way to go, George."
I promise you I will tell no more stories after this, but the Asian guy in Heroes, I never watched Heroes.
Go on.
But there was
very funny actor.
Yeah. Latour and I were in an elevator in the middle of the night. And actually, I've got 2 stories. We were in the W Hotel in San Diego.
I don't look his name up because seriously, that's a shame that we're not giving him proper credit, but keep going.
Yeah. So we're coming back from the gas, whatever we've been doing all night. Latour's in one of his, rambles, and that Asian actor who I don't even think we knew who he was, maybe, was in the elevator with us looking at his phone. We're going up, I don't know how many floors, but it took a while. And this rockabilly couple gets on, and Latour's telling me some story in his drawl, and then we'll do blah, blah, blah. And this couple gets off on their floor and stops. And she takes her cell phone and sticks it in the Asian guy's face. Again, I don't know who he was at this point, and snaps a picture of him. And they go, "We know who you are. We know who you are." And the doors slam and they get out. And the 3 of us are just in the elevator. And Latour just goes, "What the hell was that?" And the guy just is looking at his phone. And I felt so bad for him. And of course, partly because I didn't know who he was. But we were like, but that couple, same elevator, Sean Crystal and I get in. Kevin Spacey gets in.
Oh, Jesus.
His entourage. This is before he was properly canceled.
Yes, indeed. By the way, Masioka is the actor.
There you go.
Hero on Heroes. He's in the Get Smart movie. Very funny guy.
All I know about him is he was very quiet, minding his own business when he had this camera shoved in his face at 3 a.m. And
San Diego, it happens, man.
Yeah, yes, HP's right. Yeah, he's Japanese. I knew that. anyway, we're in the elevator, and Sean holds the door open, and Spacey and his crew don't want to get in because there's people in the elevator, but they kind of get in anyway, And
Sure.
Kevin's got his entourage, and then on the next floor, the W Hotel is like, it's pretty sleazy. It's like upscale sleazy, or it was at the time. And I'm not, I don't mean to insult anyone who has stock in the W, but so these two girls in bikinis get on with martini glasses, and they look at the buttons, and they kind of look around, and they go, oh, we're going down. And they get off. And of course, it's a straight line. And Sean and I are trying to mind our own business. And Spacey guys are all quiet. And Spacey goes, I'll bet they will be later. And all his guys are like, Kevin, you're so funny. And we're like, it's a good one, Mr. Spacey. And the funny part of that was as soon as he got off the elevator, Sean calls his wife. And all I heard was, we were just on an elevator with Kevin Spacey. We had it. Well, no, honey, no. Well, no, he wouldn't want us to. Well, no, I'm not on an elevator. I would. No, I'm not going to pull my phone out. No, what's he going to sign? That's and I'm just like,
that's hilarious. No, again, especially in the older days with cons like San Diego and New York. Yeah, it was not. I mean, I met Barry Levinson on the floor of New York. Got a million actors, and San Diego over the years, and it was nothing. And it was before they were so self-conscious that they would wear literally masks so that they could just comfortably walk the floor and just have fun and not be, harassed all the time. No, it's a curse and a blessing. It really is.
That reminds me, I will not to plug something, but
Well, we'll get back to the book. Don't worry, because I'm ready.
This is something that's available now in a different format. But so 100 years ago, Eric Kim and I did a pitch for Oni Press called Billy Smoke, which was it was then optioned by Warner Brothers before we'd written it or drawn it for Matthew Fox to star. At the time, he was doing Lost. And the way Hollywood works is like Matthew Fox, without a single major movie credit under his belt, was perceived as a better box office bet than, Tom Cruise, because Lost was so popular worldwide, they knew they could sell the international rights to a film, right?
Totally.
So Warner Brothers optioned it, again, based on an outline. I mean, I hadn't written anything. And then Matt Fox flew into San Diego. They flew me out to San Diego at the last minute. My producers did. And Matt Fox and I sat at the Oni booth signing posters. They said, hey, we're going to sign Billy Smoke posters. And I said, not only have I not written the book, there's no art at all. That's not a thing. So they made Eric kind of do this poster image at the last minute. And they had them all printed up. And that's a celebrity thing. It's like I go to the booth, and what Matthew Fox did was he wasn't going to go to the show, but they were having a Lost panel. And I don't even know if people realize how freaking popular Lost was. It was
ridiculous.
It was mind-boggling.
It was the Game of Thrones of the moment.
Absolutely. So, and this is right in the heart of that, which is why, like I said, why Warner Brothers took the chance. But so I get to the Oni booth, and they're like, oh, your friend's here, and I turn the corner. And I always tell people, it's like one of those experiences where, you meet actors and you talk about it, and you expect them to be short and, less attractive in person and whatever. I turn the corner, and Matthew Fox at like 6'1", in perfect shape with these piercing eyes is standing there. And I'm just like, hey, we're the same species. I mean, it was like, wow, just like wattage, you know what I mean? And he was a great guy.
That's good. That's good.
We sat there and we signed those damn posters. And at one point he started writing redemption on them with an exclamation point. I was like, what's that? He's like, I thought that'd be a cool tagline for the, No, none of these. There's a line. Yeah, there's a line around the damn convention hall because it's Matthew Fox.
Sure.
What he did, he had the studio fly him out for the Lost panel, but he only walked on at the end of the panel. To the point where I heard people on the floor go, were you at the Lost panel? Why did Matthew Fox just walk in at the end and wave everybody? Well, that was his excuse to get there for the signing, And eventually people didn't even care. They're like, he would hand it to me like they, these Lost fans wanted my signature, but he'd be like, oh, this is a thing we're doing with this writer. And anyway, long story short, Eric and I finally did the book, 200-page graphic novel.
Wow.
The option wasn't renewed because Fox ran into some issues and Warner Brothers was done with it.
Sure.
So it's sat there for about almost 10 years. Oni had it. Oni had the rights to it, but they didn't have any. It was never on their schedule, and it needed some tweaks here and there. And finally, I just asked James Lucas Jones at Oni. I'm like, can we just have that? And I mean, it exists, so we'll do something with it. So anyway, there's a phone app called Macroverse.
Okay, yeah.
Which Evan Matthews approached me about maybe doing something for it, and Eric and I started talking about doing something. We realized, well, we got Billy Smoke just sitting there. So I don't think they need to work bugs out with the app, because the app it's really, I don't like when I'm trying to read, first of all, reading, unless you've got a big iPhone, reading comics on the phone is so-so, but most people do have a bigger screen now. But most of the time they've got all this fake motion shit built into it, and it always disrupts the rhythm of the story for me. But this Macroverse app is very much, it's the comic book, basically. They'll transpose balloons, and you can click to get the balloons up and everything. But it's the only phone app I've ever seen that kind of eliminates a lot of the stupid bells and whistles that are distracting, and it's actually a pretty good reading experience. So they launched it a while ago, but they just relaunched it recently with kind of more of a push. And they've got like a free, you pay for the app, but they've got a bunch of different original comic book stories on the app by different creators. And I would encourage, even if you don't pay for it or download it, at least Google Macroverse and kind of see what they're up to. And do the free trial on it, and you can check Billy Smoke out. It's all, I guess they're doing it by chapter. And we still have the rights to that too. I had to rewrite it because it was written in a different era. And there's some stuff that is not about being politically correct. There's just some stuff that tonally I didn't feel comfortable with. So I kind of re-scripted some of it. And even Eric Kim, who is the artist, who's a super sensitive, sweet guy, he's a Canadian guy, he was a little iffy about doing it at all because it's so violent. And this was kind of right after the wave of shootings and, guns waved around and stuff. And I respect him for that, but I've never tied violence in what I do to real world violence.
I agree, by the way. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I also didn't even want to give that indication, so to speak. But I mean, if he wasn't comfortable with it, that's fine, But anyway, we did it through Macroverse, and it's still being done there. And a lot of people have asked me about that over the years too, because it was such a weird thing. They called me and they were like, "Yeah, we had pitched it a couple years earlier, but it was the kind of thing where Oni's a small press place, and we knew it was going to be kind of a thick graphic novel, and it wasn't. We were going to have to do it sort of almost on spec, and get paid afterwards. We get paid a small amount, and so we hadn't done anything with it. But their producers had the pitch like on a table for Hollywood guys, and Matthew Fox had just done Speed Racer, where he was Racer X.
With the Wachowskis.
Underrated film.
Yes, I agree, and again, I think an underrated Wachowskis film in particular.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he'd really gotten like jacked to do that role, and he loved the fight scenes and shit. So he wanted to do an action thing, and he gravitated towards the outline for Billy Smoke. And they called me. They said, "Hey, can you do like a 2-page synopsis for Billy Smoke?" And I'm like, "I could, but why?" And they're like, "Well, we think if you do that, Warner Brothers will option it for a film." And I said, "Well, that won't happen. I mean, it doesn't make any sense." I spent a couple days doing it, and like within a week, Warner Brothers had optioned it, with I don't remember. They had the producer attached that was big time, and and it was. And I remember Eric Kim going, "Do we have to do the book now?" And I was like, "Yeah, we do have to do the book. We can't, we don't want to get into the habit of selling, pretend comics as IP." So anyway, so we did do it. I'm glad it's out there now. So it is out there now concurrently. It's something people can check out if they want to. And then, of course, Miles to Go an hour and a half later. Comes out in 2 weeks.
All good, buddy. And so let's talk about Miles to Go. And in fact, I can share my screen, and I will show some conceptual art that, let's see here. I just got to make sure I'm doing this right. Is it the app or is it the Chrome tab?
Was there a dude in the sidebar there that thought we'd be insulted by being called idiots?
The guy wouldn't let up. And
okay.
And that's fine. And also I love when they're like, "Oh, I guess free speech isn't allowed." It's like, what?
Well, you just want to call us idiots, okay? I mean, it's not real entertaining, but
whatever. And that's
why. So anyone knows, that gentleman wanted you to know that we're idiots. So I don't want to hey, Dean Haspiel's on board.
Yes, indeed. So can we see his comment? Forgive me.
He said great. He said great to see me because
absolutely. Yes, indeed.
He hasn't seen me for a while. So
okay, there it is. And boom. So characters and designs and sketches by Steven. And here we go. So this is the lead. This is Amara Bishop.
Oh yeah, these are actually the original. So yeah, I gave John the I sent him a link to the original pitch. So if you're curious, this is kind of how I do my pitches. This was about a 20. What does it say there? I can't read. It's like 23 pages maybe or something. It was an extensive pitch. We
yeah, it's part of the big file that you sent me with the issue. And we did a sample scene that Steven drew and colored. We did a lot of the character designs. Well, there's the sample scene to kind of give an indication of the tone and how the art would look. That scene actually probably isn't going to make it into this series, but well, this is Amara. This is our lead, and she is. I mean, this is a world of hitmen and hitwomen, and there's another, again, the conceptual ideas behind Amara. And give us the 10-cent pitch, buddy.
So it's it sounds kind of convoluted, but it's basically I was thinking about I took two ideas that I'd had for a while, and I was thinking about the movie Leon the Professional with Natalie Portman, and it kind of led to me thinking. Thomas asks what the average length of a pitch is. It varies. This one was a longer pitch because the way I always build a pitch is so I was a journalism major, and in journalism there's the inverted pyramid. The idea being when you write an article, the most important information is up top. And so you can get the gist of a story up top. And if you're interested in the details, you can keep reading and there's less and less pertinent information as it goes. Well, that's how I build a pitch. The idea being if you just read the first page of the pitch, you should have a pretty clear idea, or if you're interested or not. So I'll do maybe 2 pages of the basic concept, the basic story, try to give them kind of a high concept that they can relate to other things, some brief character descriptions. And then from there, I'll break it down in more detail. And with this one, I did a lot of detail. I went into like the whole family history of the characters. Because while this is a 5-issue series to start with, this is a 5-issue series to start with. The story itself, we'd like it to be a lot bigger than that. Now we'll wrap up the first 5 issues will wrap up a story point and get us kind of to where we could launch into the next chapter if we're allowed to, because I'd like it to be a bigger story than that. But anyway, we went into a lot of detail about the family relationships and stuff. And I think if you read it all as an editor or publisher, it just gives you confidence that we understand the world that we've built and we know where we want to head with it. And then I included all these character designs that Steven had done, some sample pages. I did a little fake Defense Department document that kind of actually, if you only read that, it would sort of spoil and explain.
That's why I don't want to show it. Absolutely.
But it's funny because I put that in the first issue as back matter, but I redacted anything that gives anything away. And when they first sent me the files to approve, they hadn't redacted anything, and I was like, "Well, this gives the whole story away." So anyway, I was thinking about what would happen if that character or a character like that, because it's kind of a trope that the kid, you could even go back to Robin or whatever, the kid sidekick or the killer or whatever,
sure,
and gets involved in this adult world. I was like, well, what would happen if that ended and years down the road, she was just a normal person? How would she deal with the fact that at some point in her history, she was killing people, as a preteen with a hitman? So that's the character, sort of, but there's a reason why she was really adept at killing people at the age of 12 years old. And she has never succeeded in anything else in her life like she did as a prepubescent, or as an evolving, coming into puberty, associating with this hitman named Marco Tiger. The only thing she was ever any good at was killing people with this guy, which she did without any reservation. And she didn't do real well with a career. Her marriage hasn't really worked out. She's devoted to her daughter, but she can't really figure out why things don't work. And she's thinking all the time about the past. That's the thing that always comes up. Like we open with a dream sequence where she remembers killing somebody, and her reaction when she wakes up isn't shock or anything. It's just literally like, oh, that was me.
Yeah.
So then we meet her mentor who's aging, and then we meet a former partner of her mentor who was an assassin back in the day as well. And we realized that these two guys were part of a network of assassins who did freelance work for the government. He thinks these people are after him, but they're obviously after her. And so the story becomes about, well, who are they hunting? Who are they chasing? And who are they really after? And why are they after them? Because from Amara's perspective, she was involved in this assassination ring. And if they're going after her mentor, maybe she's collateral damage.
Sure.
But then it becomes, well, if she's collateral damage, is her daughter collateral damage?
Absolutely.
Moses here, who she connects with, has an estranged daughter who has never met him. Suddenly in his mind, the third issue, which I think is the best thing I've ever written. It examines his backstory and how his daughter was conceived, basically, and it was involved with a mission of his. So that's so now he's got that concern, and so like the underlying themes are kind of about family and how we prioritize our own obsessions and interests and how we treat and relate to the people who love us and the people that we're connected to with family bonds, all in these genre trappings with, hitman and hitwomen. And that involves Amara too. She's like a second generation Indian American who has no real connection to her culture because she was raised alone by her drunken father in a trailer, which is where she met the assassin she hooked up with. So her identity is all tied into nothing more than her literal experiences in life.
And culture. Yeah.
She doesn't really connect with her culture. But she is Indian American. And then her daughter is biracial because her father's black. And for me, that's not like a pandering element. It was actually Stephen's idea to make Amara Indian American because it's an unusual, you don't see it much, and we're tired of doing stories about white dudes. And then Stephen actually designed, like physically, he was like, well, let's make her short and stout. She's like an MMA fighter, just kind of a different.
Muscular. No,
right, exactly.
Beyond being a great shot and everything, no, she can take care of herself. Clearly.
Right. And so that's the kind of thing. And then when I'm doing a creator-owned book, the artistic collaborator, it's always a 50-50 proposition. They're gonna own half of it because their collaboration is going to shape where the book goes. And so his idea kind of opened up some of those thoughts about issues of American identity and culture and what have you. Because, no matter, we're a hodgepodge and we're a biracial hodgepodge more and more, and it's not going to change, and
Great.
And how do people who aren't connected directly with their heritage, how do they find their place and what have you? And so that just gave it a little extra element, and to me, more of a contemporary, realistic element, rather than just, picking an ethnicity or picking a gender or whatever, and trying to, it all evolved naturally through the story, is what I'm saying.
Honestly, the designs are great, and I do think that my always litmus test is how much story do you give me in the first chapter, and you did a great job. I think it's a cool.
I appreciate that. It was 5 issues. It's a tough, and Stephen had a lot to do with this. The estranged husband Niles only appears in maybe 2 pages, but the first page you meet him on, I think you completely know who this guy is. You can see the condition. He's divorced. John's going. He's falling asleep on us.
No, all good, buddy. Don't you start.
You know that they're divorced or estranged by the conversation with the daughter and the mother. But then when you see the guy who's like he's like an engineer. He's got his tie on. Also,
absolutely.
His kitchen is a complete disaster, and there's and the daughter comments that when she he's got an Xbox, but his Wi-Fi never works, and he's never. So through shorthand, through a combination of dialogue and Stephen's world building visually, I think you have a real clear idea of who this guy is. Well, you think you do. I mean, we've got surprises in store as we go about Niles.
That seems absolutely.
And again, in 5 issues, I think it's gonna rush to a conclusion that, and because that third issue is almost an interlude, that gives you a lot of backstory and information about Moses, the older hitman. It's the center of the series, but hopefully it all comes together, and hopefully people are satisfied with where it lands, and also are curious enough to see where it goes from here.
I think it's really got great flavor of conspiracy to it, and secret organizations, and things aren't as they seem.
Right, and there's government, there's all kinds of and
truly, man, no, I've always enjoyed those stories that you've done over the years. So I think you're well versed at this kind of genre, and no, I think it looks great, and I think it's a fun story, and I'm always up for more good crime comics.
Well, I'll tell you, John. I mentioned earlier, the retro thing. I enjoy doing retro stuff because I grew up obsessed with. I have this kind of obsessive compulsive nature, and if there was anything I was interested in, I needed to know nuts. Soup. Soup to nuts, which is an expression nobody's used in 75 years.
Exactly.
But it was like I had to. Comics. This is kind of pre-internet. I had to know the Golden Age, the Overstreet Price Guide. What the hell? I had to know all this stuff. Movies.
I like that too.
Yeah. Film, TV, contemporary. Yeah. But also I wanted to know the whole thing.
Well, and we grew up in that, cable was happening, but we were, again, we were part of that 5-channel world as little kids.
Right.
Really did appreciate.
Well, my family was late to cable. Like everybody had it. I was not. I was comfortable. I was raised comfortably. Don't get me wrong, but if we didn't have something, for whatever reason, my parents did a really good job of not we didn't expect to have everything.
Sure.
So cable was this luxury to the point where I remember when we moved before my 8th grade year, which was like my 5th move in 6 years, which was not easy. One of their enticements was, we'll get cable, and of course all my friends had cable for years and years. It wasn't like this was the MTV, this was, but I remember being like, oh shit, I never thought we could get cable, or even a VCR, and
funny.
Yeah. But yeah, the amount of knowledge that, and you're in the same boat, that
totally
we accumulated before it was all at your fingertips is kind of mind-boggling sometimes, and it's almost like, geez, I wasted a whole lot of time going through books and libraries, and but crate digging was a lot more fun back then.
Patton Oswalt wrote a great essay about that, or article about the pursuit of pop culture, and that was part of the fun, was the hunt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. There was only one specialty shop in Chicago that had Doctor Who paraphernalia in the early 80s, and that was the only place you could get it. Yeah. So it was an event to get on a couple buses and go to that store and buy that tchotchke or whatever and come home and all right, we did something, as opposed to, oh, look, there it is on eBay. All right, done. So no, I get it, man.
And it's even with music. I remember, I would buy record guides, and I would hunt CDs that were in print I couldn't find. You know what I mean? I remember looking for Nick Drake CDs that had been in print for years, but you didn't, anyway. But
Japanese import vinyl. I was a kid, absolutely. That was a big pursuit.
No, I love. Don't get me wrong. The internet has really been a blessing with that knowledge. And I'm glad that I didn't have it as a kid, because what I've figured out is that what people do is get tunnel vision, and the only thing they know everything about is whatever their specific interest is, and they lose these branches. It's crazy to me that knowledge of all this stuff is narrowed with the internet.
Agreed. Even something as simple as the physical newspaper.
Oh yeah.
By that, and it really was this great cross section of information that you wouldn't have stumbled on your own. And now, certainly, when you consume your news online, the cookies are tailoring news that it knows you're interested in these subjects, and think of the things that you're missing. So yeah.
Right. And I was a journalism major, as you could see the writing in the wall. It was not a great. Even at that point, in the early 90s, you could see the writing on the wall with where this thing you were, now, it's diversified and there are different outlets and stuff. But the problem is when it's pervasive and, people are willing to just throw shit out there. It's harder to, it's harder to make a living at, but forget all that. Anyway, my point about the retro thing is, so for me, it was always, I always had this interest in these different eras. Also, it was all there. So you had an era that existed, and not only did the era exist, but people's perceptions of the era could help define how you dealt with the era, if that makes any sense. So like Battle Hymn, for instance, which was World War II thing that Jeremy and I did. This is before Marvel or DC were doing a whole lot of their retro World War II stuff. The basic idea was I was looking at the Human Torch, Marvel Comics, right? The Human Torch is this flaming android that pops up in 1939 in the United States. And I thought, there's no way in hell that a flaming android shows up and the government isn't immediately going, holy shit, we're in the middle of a war. Can we get some flaming androids, and Marvel had never, at that point, had never really done much with any of that stuff. So I thought, okay, well, let's find some popular tropes of these golden, the patriotic hero, the British hero, the android, and just build a story around, well, how would the government really react if there were superpower? And when I say superpower, like we had a speedster who could run maybe 45 miles an hour, who was more of a womanizer. Anyway,
yes,
but it was fun to play with.
So the boys, honestly, before Eric came up with the boys. No, I get it.
Thanks, Amazon. I had a guy try to pitch Battle Hymn to Warner Brothers, which granted they picked up Billy Smoke, but I remember telling him, I'm like, that Warner Brothers owns DC Comics, right? They have.
Yeah, they got PSA if they.
He was like, "This is a great idea," And I mean, like a week later, he's like, "Well, here's the deal. So Warner Brothers owns DC Comics." I'm like, "Yeah, we had this conversation," but
I understand.
But I get. My point was not only I'm never trying to recreate the era. What I'm trying to do is use people's perceptions of the era to create a world that's kind of a combination of what and the Hawaiian Dick's the same way. When Hawaiian Dick was announced, I was followed on internet websites by this contingent of angry Hawaiians who were convinced this Howley white dude was going to write this surfboards and we had preview art, and like Bird is he's a white dude from the States who is struggling in Hawaii, and we never try to make him seem like anything other than a fish out of water in the book. But I remember he's got khaki pants on. And I remember these comments when they just saw preview art. Oh, only a Howley would wear khaki pants, only a white guy. And I'm like, yeah. But also, I guarantee you, if you look at pictures of 1953, any white dude from the States is walking around, but that was the perception they thought, that they thought that it was going to be that. But then when the book came out, it was actually really well received in Hawaii, and the Honolulu Star Bulletin did it. Yeah, and that was gratifying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nobody thought we were trampling on their culture.
It
was never supposed to be a documentary, but we didn't want to, insult their culture. I mean,
of course, absolutely, yes, indeed.
So, but my problem with the retro thing was then, when DC first contacted me about doing something, the worst decision I ever made in terms of career and momentum, if I had wanted to be a mainstream, DC, and I've done a lot of work for DC, but it's all been. Was Jan Jones was Dan DiDio's assistant at the time. Jan, who eventually married James Robinson, not married now, but they.
And now Jan Jones at Legendary Comics.
Yes, Jan is awesome. One of my favorite people in the world.
You don't have to convince me, buddy. She's a dear friend. Absolutely.
Well, she had been married to J.G. Jones, the artist, and they were fans of Hawaiian Dick, and J.G. super nice guy,
absolutely sweetheart guy. Absolutely.
Yeah. So before this was the only thing I'd done, and they. If I saw them at a con, they were always like, oh man, we've got it. We put it in our bathroom so people can read it. And so Jan became Dan DiDio's assistant and contacted me, hey, do you want to do some work for DC? Sure. So Dan, and I talked to Dan, and he says, well, you do this, kind of detective noir stuff and everything. Would you want to tell the story of we want to tell the story of how Batman first met Detective Bullock. So we want to do kind of this hard-boiled noir story about that. And then he goes, or we also need some more material for the JSA Classified. And I, being a Justice Society fan and everything, I was like, man, I've always said if I got the chance to do, a Wildcat story. So stupidly, there's just don't ever, people, if DC says, hey, you want to do a Batman story, or do you want to do this book is dying, it's secondary characters. So I did the Wildcat story, which actually at the time Dan had promised me was going to be a springboard to a Wildcat series, and I wrote it that way, and he was very happy with it. That didn't happen, but
so I get what you're saying from a commercial standpoint about obviously wanting to do a Batman story. That said, look at the success that some creatives have had taking a second-tier character and putting a new spin on them. Tom King certainly comes to mind with what he's doing.
Sure, but Tom wrote Batman.
Right. Well, but also what got him the Batman job,
right,
was doing the Vision story at Marvel.
Correct. And
that's the thing, man. And then critically, that took off.
Yeah. And I don't know how I'm sure I've heard the story. I talked to Mitch Gerads about the stuff he and Tom do, and which is phenomenal. I'm a huge Tom. The Batman is fine.
Another group of great guys. Absolutely.
But man, the side characters that they focused on, Mr. Miracle and
Adam Strange.
Adam Strange. That stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I thought I'd see myself doing, but I ended up doing this series, and then I did a Superman story, and they asked me to they basically said, do an old school Superman story. Well, Phil Hester, dear friend, Andy Parks, the anchor, great guys, phenomenal talents.
Another two good guys.
We were playing poker one night we were actually at Tony Moore's house playing poker. Here you go. Here's name dropping. It's me and Matt Fraction and Jason Aaron and Tony. These Kansas City guys, and I'm like, hey, you guys want to draw a Superman story? So Phil kind of had carte blanche on the covers. One of the covers has Superman like bursting through a birthday cake. He's fighting a giant Tin Man on one, and then on another one he's throwing luchadors out of the ring.
It was a Toyman story, right?
Yeah, but this is when Dan DiDio is really loading up on miserable, like the one note I got on that story was there's a scene where the Toyman operates like a big Tin Man flamethrower thing, and there's this like homeless dude sees it and is like, whoa, what the hell is that? And the note I got was Toyman should incinerate the homeless guy.
Wow.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, trust me, it'll play better with Dan. So I'm like, all right. So for no reason at all, the Toyman looks at this dude and just burns him alive.
Wow.
So anyway, the point is, bright Superman stories with Superman fighting teddy bears, and that did not do me any favors with Dan. And I know that Jan, would argue with Dan about what I couldn't do. But then what happened was I did a Losers World War II one shot. I did a Doc Savage fill in. I did a JSA story. I did create something at Wildstorm, and then Tony and I did this Whistling Skull story tied into the JSA. Excuse me. After the fact, it was originally a Wildstorm book standing on its own, but then when Wildstorm collapsed, Tony's like a bull in a china shop. He's like, let's try this. And he's like, hey, I want to see if they'll let us use the JSA in our creator-owned original book. And, of course, I'm like, but that's not going to happen. Well, somehow it did, because he had co-created the JSA Elseworld stuff.
And Whistling Skull was a British superhero.
It was a generational – right. It was a generational –
yes.
And his sidekick was named Knuckles, which unrelated to the bar. It was just a name we had to use. It was like a pulp thing. The problem though is that when we went there, Tony really wanted it to be kind of an all ages book because he, for whatever reason, we had younger kids, and he was kind of like, we can hand this off to our kids and stuff. And he thank you, Scott.
Scott loved the wisdom for the audience. Go on.
Again, Dave McCaig coded it. That's my favorite Tony Harris stuff, his kind of freehand cartoon stuff. But anyway.
Yeah.
But so it became this all ages thing because he didn't want it to fall to Vertigo. Now, I'm totally down with what Tony wanted to do with it, and we did it that way. Personally, I probably would have rather gotten a little weirder with it and a little darker and done it that way. But again, it kind of added to this perception that I was doing these retro books, which I like the retro stuff, but that's not my aesthetic. Isn't old school. if that makes sense. That's like Battle Hymn, for instance, is a really hard-edged, harsh take on old school comics. And you know, I did a number of odds and ends at DC over the years. Had a lot of stuff fall through that I had wanted to do, but you know, I did a Batman digital story, which I brought Ben Templesmith in on.
Oh, yes, I remember that, indeed.
First thing he ever did at DC. And again, I had to fight to get Ben. There was this perception of like, it was almost like, don't even look at what Ben does. Understand that Ben brings 10,000 loyal readers with him. And also if he's going to do anything, he's suited to Batman. Now, of course, after that, he did a Gotham book at DC. So we did a 3-part digital story that then was published as a single issue, which of the DC stuff I did, that's the closest in terms of superhero stories to what my aesthetic might be, I think. I read a lot of my stuff from the past, and there, you know, with work for hire, you don't always know who you're working with. And, you know, and sometimes you're like, boy, the artist didn't quite get what I was doing, or I'm not happy with what I did. But, you know, I recently reread that story and I thought, I think this works, you know. And I was reading Tom Taylor's Year Zero, Injustice Year Zero, which has the Justice Society in it. And Tom's a friend of mine and a great guy. There's actually a bit in there with the Joker that I know he didn't lift from me, but it's real similar to something I had done in that Batman story.
Oh, interesting.
And he has 2 henchmen with clown masks on, and one of them wants to burn everything, and the Joker's like, "What is the deal?" And the other guy's like, "Oh, he's an arsonist." And Joker's like, "Are you an arsonist?" And the guy's like, "No, I'm an assassin." And he's like, "Well, then shoot him." And so he shoots the arsonist. Well, I had this bit where the Joker has the Mad Hatter tied to a chair because he wants to use his He's hypnotizing Gotham citizens into believing they're Batman, and then he's throwing them like at Killer Croc and shit. And they're getting eaten alive and stuff. And his thinking is, well, Batman's not doing a very good job, so we'll throw, you know, we'll get. So he's got Mad Hatter tied to a chair, and he's got 2 henchmen, one of whom used to work for Killer Croc. And the guy is doubting the Joker. And so the Joker kills a second henchman to show that guy, hey, if I'm going to kill this guy who's not giving me any trouble, I won't hesitate to kill you. So get in line. You know what I mean? And then he walks out, and the guy looks at the Mad Hatter. He's like, he's going to kill me, isn't he? And the Mad Hatter's like, I don't know why any of you people work for this guy. You know, he's going to kill all of us. And it was funny reading that with Tom. And I'm like, that's, you know, again, similar aesthetics. But I also remember having a DC vice president talk to me about that story. And I was like, because I was trying to figure out at the time, I'm like, I'm not really doing what I want to do at DC. And I talked to Dan, he calls me, and I'm like, I don't think, you know, you get to this point where they have this perception, and you can say, that's not, you know, I don't want to, I don't just want to be that guy.
Sure.
But until you prove it somewhere else, you know. And so I was talking to Hank Canals, who just left DC, who
was a Wildstorm guy as well.
Great guy. Hank came up through Image with Jim Lee and was kind of one of Jim Lee's right-hand guys at DC.
Yes.
Ironically, Hank and I grew up in the same town outside of Dallas, and as kids shopped at the exact same comic shop in Dallas, which Bob Wayne then bought after I left Dallas, and he went from there to DC. Just, you know, one of those small world things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No, I love Bob. That's hilarious.
But Hank was awesome. He was one of the few guys at DC that would just be straight with you about stuff, you know? Like, my attitude right now is that administration is gone, Dan's gone and everything, so I can be upfront about some things.
Sure.
The Whistling Skull, they were going to give it a huge push, and it was on the front of their Comixology page, and you had all this PR plan for it and everything. Tony, who I love Tony to death, Tony is a prickly pear sometimes. He's just one of those guys you just kind of have to ride the waves with. And in comics, personalities are such that people, you know, egos get bruised and people. Well, Tony went on this sort of rant the week that the Whistling Skull was solicited on Facebook about cosplayers.
I remember. And
knowing Tony as I did, it didn't seem to really reflect. He and Tim Seeley and I had been at a convention the week before with cosplayers everywhere, and none of this was a topic for conversation. It was bad timing, in other words. And I remember talking to Ben Abernathy, who was our editor, and I'm like, what do we do? And Ben was just like this far from going over the edge. And I emailed Tony, and he was like, oh, he's mad at me as everybody else. And I'm like, well, the timing could be better. So the FOC went down after his rant. And some months later, because we wanted to do like 40 issues of this book, and it solicited really well out of the gate. Well, some months later, I ran into Hank at a convention, and I was having this conversation about stuff. And he goes, oh, yeah, we killed the PR on the Whistling Skull after that rant from Tony, right? And I was like, no. I was like, I didn't do anything. It's like,
I know.
I was like, yeah, okay. But that's just it's the way it goes. And I appreciate Hank being frank with me about that, because it was puzzling. I mean, I knew it wasn't going to help us when, the internet just grabs for like that week. That was the thing that everybody was.
Dude, yeah. I mean, good Lord, a more recent example. And I mean, honestly, poor Brian Hitch is suffering from the Warren Ellis meeting.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah. You're collaborators. I mean,
hey, it happens. And that's the thing. Yeah. It's a real shame because, listen, Warren got what, and I am saying this. I don't want anyone else. I don't want this attributed to Clay. I'm saying this. Warren got what he deserved. And I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And I am the biggest Warren Ellis fan in the world.
And he's a very talented man, but was obviously using his influence on women creators. They were of age, as far as I know, I believe. But regardless, no, he was being a jerk. And this is really a lousy time. There's never a good time, but honestly, the real guy that got the collateral damage was Brian, who was drawing the shit out of this Batman's Grave book. Gorgeous book, great new fresh designs on Batman's costume. And it really, I'm really angry for Hitch, because he's a great guy, and he even, as you likely know, Clay, he even, was such a meticulous artist that a lot of times he'd be late on books, and he's really rediscovered, and it's been through our conversations on Word Balloon that I learned this. He has found shortcuts that make him satisfied with his art, and now he's an on-time artist. Yeah. So he is really hitting his groove, and isn't that great after having done comics for over 20 plus years that he is in this headspace, and now he's got to deal with his collaborator who's an asshole. And I think he's an asshole because
the trickle down effect is even greater than that. I mean, you think about, and again, I'm not going to sit here and bash Warren. I'm sure he's trying to process more.
He's an asshole.
I agree. I agree. But it's up to him to fix himself. It's not up to me to fix him. But it puts people like Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction who met his board and he didn't. This was a side of himself that he would not have shown to those people, but then they're suddenly forced to have to process it and deal with it. And
I speak publicly to it as well. Right. Kel and I had, and I mean, they're like my little brother and sister, Clay. They have always been like that to me. And it was such a shitty thing that they had to go through, kind of shrugging and have to explain their friend, who was always a good friend to them.
Thomas Helget here mentions Declan Shavley, who is another friend and a phenomenal guy.
Yes.
And
Jason Howard, good guy, yeah.
But I mean, I know from talking to Declan when this was happening, just the same thing happened with. I mean, look, we're not here to throw people under the bus, but the reality is there's no reason to run away from the reality of the way these people have behaved. And it's like it's Brian Wood is another guy,
Wood.
Phenomenal guys like Mac Chater and these collaborators who initially will maybe go out on a limb when you hear whispers or rumors, because that's not a side. It's one thing people don't really understand is how well these people hide this side of themselves. And then I was beating around the bush about Paper Museum. That was a Jai Nitz book. Jai has been a fixture in Kansas City for years. And frankly, look, you can say, oh, guy's sleazy. Well, sleazy is one thing, or creepy, or just, has a vibe. But you don't know a guy's a monster, because that's a side of him that he's not going to show you. And to the point when you think back on it, you realize not only did he not show you that side, he deflected, like he presented himself as, you know, the opposite, sort of like hapless, and he was always the butt of jokes and stuff. And I mean, I don't want to get, court of law has chimed in on this, but that freaking guy is a monster. It's
I mean, again,
and I don't like. I mean,
on your street that you're like, gee, you always seem like you said, kind of a bumbling, silly guy. And you don't.
This guy I've known for 20 years. I mean, I've been social. I mean, I've shared rooms with this guy, and look, I'm not the victim. I mean, the real victims are the actual victims. So I'm not sitting here playing poor me. But what it does is it reflects on the community and puts the rest of us in a position where we get defensive, and it turns into this weird, which it shouldn't be. We should all be on the same page with this stuff, and we try to be. But and I mean, I had guys with Jai, like, oh, well, my girlfriend knew he was a sleazy. I'm like, yeah, a guy gives you a sleazy vibe, but that doesn't mean he's literally a monster.
A monster. No, I agree.
And
it's
so. I mean,
really disappointing. I know we are dancing on the third rail right now.
Yeah,
and honestly, but Clay, it's true, and truly, again, you and I are not the victims, and our other friends that were friends with these people, they're not the real victims. It's embarrassing, and we know that there should be better judgment. And and like you said, it reflects on us. Like, well, you were friends with this guy. How could you allow that? And it's like, we didn't know. None of us knew. And then that's the sad. And that's why I bring up Hitchy, because it's like, yeah, he didn't know. And it's like, goddamn, now the guy should be really. And thankfully, I think as time will progress, Hitch will be okay. He'll be all right.
He'll be fine. I mean, Brian's a tremendous talent guy. Declan, Jason, they'll.
And a good married guy that doesn't subscribe to those kind of behaviors and everything. No, and again, it's like this should really be that Batman's Grave really should have been like another great run of Hitches. And now, as you say, like unfortunately, with what happened with Wilson Skull and those unfortunate things that Tony said. No, that's the only reason why I bring it up. Yeah, DC kind of pulled the plug on all the promotion for Batman's Grave.
Sure,
it happens, and that sucks.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't blame DC for it, and I mean, I don't even I know Tony well enough to know that he's talking out of his ass. I mean, it's just a stupid. You forget, and that was 6-7 years ago, which even then things were a little different. But you just have to be hyper vigilant and aware that it doesn't matter what corner you think you're preaching to, it's going to get amplified, and then you're going to have to answer for what.
Let me tell you a non-comic story that literally happened today. As you know, I spent 20 years in sports talk radio.
Yes, I know.
And my great friend. How about the White Sox? And the Cubs, I'm ready to kill them. It's like, guys, don't please. Good Lord. What are you going to do? Anyway, I know. I'm a North Side guy. But I love the Sox. They're good guys. Anyway, no, a dear friend of mine, and I won't name him, but all you people have to do is look up any Monday Night Football action from last night, but he made a really inappropriate tweet about the NFL sideline reporter saying, is she reporting on the NFL, or is she a presenter at the AVN Awards, which we know are the porn Oscars?
Right. I didn't know that.
My God, the guy lost his job. And listen, it was a stupid joke, and I am not condoning it in any way. But God damn it, dude, this is a broadcaster. Understand what's going on in social media and just in pop culture and, frankly, the culture in general.
Yeah.
And it's respect the temperature in the room and don't say something that stupid. And it really, I mean, it was terrible. He was commenting on what she was wearing as a sideline reporter. And frankly, when you see the photographs, and some of you may be aware of this story, it's like, what?
Yeah.
And again, he was just making what would have been 30 years ago, or 30 years ago, like a college level joke.
Yeah.
But again, times have changed, and mores and societal mores have changed. You got to respect that. You have to respect that.
Yeah.
Or if not, to accept the consequences. This is the world we're in.
I haven't seen many people. I mean, I've seen. Put it this way: there's white guys stepping on putting their feet in their mouth and whatever, we have these conversations, because we all talk to each other all the time. And there is that one level of concern where, well, gosh, what if I make a misstep and it gets blown out of proportion? But I will say this, excuse me. I have seen that happen occasionally where somebody will get, take shots from one corner that aren't necessarily warranted, but those almost never really, snowball. I mean, because there maybe we overreact to things, but things that do need to be reacted to. So if there's an overreaction, it's understandable. It just underscores that whatever behavior or comment was made was wrong and inappropriate. When I've had friends who, and to be honest with you, the attacks usually come from the left in a lot of cases, because you're not lined up, with whatever sensibility somebody wants you to project. If there's validity to it, James and Greg ran into with their Airboy book. They ran into something that was it an overreaction? I mean, was it within the context of the story with those characters? It actually worked, but in understanding the impact or the reaction people within the community would have, James, who is, San Francisco guy for a long time and very involved in the community as a whole. The editor on that book, Joel Enos, who's a gay man who's been with his partner for 20 some years. They have 2 daughters together. These are not people who are insensitive or what have you. And poor Joel was kind of left in a position where, geez, I have to respond to elements of my community in this, but they handled that properly. There's no harm in stepping back and saying, you know what? It doesn't hurt the book if we step back from something that some people took offense to. It's not, they're not protesting. And I think for the most part, that was accepted. That's the key right there, is if you're contrite and if you own up to it, that's fine. Now, if it's a stupid criticism or way overstepping and you don't want to address it, more often than not, it doesn't lead to mass boycott. You'll have some people looking for the platform. But I think the Airboy, which by the way was a great book.
I enjoyed the book as well.
Frankly, I was probably wrong initially. I was like, really? I was like, the way these characters are presented in the book. But then I was like, okay, those characters were kind of caricatures that were, playing on tropes and stereotypes. And so I was like, okay, and the artist, Greg Hinkle, who's that was his first real big project. Super nice, sensitive guy. And it terrified him. He was, because they come, there's very little, hey, this is how we feel about this. There's immediately an editorial somewhere and, 100,000 comments condemning someone, for who they are.
Culture.
And he was spooked to death over it. And I said, look, I think it'll be fine. They'll if it's handled correctly, and you're the artist back, but like literally some people, that's enough for some people to just go, I can't do this.
It's a world without nuance right now.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that common sense eventually does come back. It is really hard. And all I know is that, again, and we say this as 2 middle-aged white guys, but it's true. I do think that I think there needs to be room for an apology and redemption and a chance to make good on an honest mistake. And it has to be case by case. There are monsters, as we've pointed out, and then there are people that, again, made honest mistakes and try to do right by the people that were offended. And I can think of other examples as well. And it's new territory. And I think, these are my comments, I hope that the people that are offended at least give the people that did the offense an opportunity to learn from it and be better people.
But they're just, I'm not speaking for you, John, but let's make it clear that there are 2 different things we're talking about here. The behavior, calculated behavior that preys on people is unacceptable. And you don't need to sit back and wait for contrition.
No, I'm talking about made
Right,
something
right. Now,
mistakenly.
I do think we should allow those people, I mean, the big flap with Cameron Stewart and his behavior and stuff. And okay, absolutely. No, the reaction was completely correct. Let's hope that Cameron can learn from that. And if he does learn from that, and we believe he's learned from that, it doesn't erase the pain that someone felt. And hopefully, and that's up to him to make contrition with them, or them to accept it or not accept it. There is behavior there are some people that have been bounced out of this industry that I will actively work to make, people I knew things about on a small level, not enough to come forward. There's always, you let people know, like if you hear somebody, you get this feeling, or you've heard this thing about, like maybe this person feels this way about, has acted on their feelings about homosexuals or this or that or whatever, but they're playing a different game over here. I never have a problem. I'm not going to come out and say, this is what I've heard, because I can't, you can't accuse people of something that you don't have proof or knowledge of. But I will definitely tell the gay editor that he's trying to line up work with, I know that he said this to a friend of mine. So you might want to think about how you deal with this guy. But when it comes to things like Airboy and like things that have offended people unintentionally, the first concept, intent always has to be the first thing you look at. Now, that doesn't mean, you may not have intended to insult someone or to offend someone, but what you may have done may be legitimately offensive. But if the intent isn't there, then there should always be room, assuming you're willing to listen to the people that are talking to you, to say, tell me what, and if they come back at you with honesty, then your reaction needs to be honest. Now, if they come back to you and they're just, if there's some pasty white dude with a wispy beard who's trying to earn brownie points, as an ally, those are the guys I can't stand, because first of all, those are the guys I'm not going to trust with anybody that they're trying to ally themselves with. And also, they always seem to be speaking for these groups that can speak for themselves. Those guys drive me up a tree. That's the JW element that I don't have time for.
It's not necessary to name a specific situation, but it was something that I heard a few years ago, and they were older creators. They created a character. A lot of transgender people took offense to it because, and they perceived the character to be transgendered. That was not the creator's intent. And the best thing was, they're like, hey, sorry, this was my thinking. You have taught me a lesson. I appreciate that and welcomed. Please let me handle this character that you perceive as transgender in a more appropriate way. And it diffused that momentary anger. And So anyway, I would say let's stop talking about this.
Yes, because that is part of what's necessary for creators to, there are guys who've been in this industry for a long damn time. Like Mark Wade's a good example. Every now and then, Mark Wade does something that's as good as anybody that just, that's hot and doing great stuff does, because he's willing to evolve and, and use the elements that work about his, and use whatever elements work for him and adapt them, so there's no barrier where you're like, I've been in the industry for 20 years, I'm done. It's only that if you're not willing to evolve and figure out what's connecting with people. So,
and a positive note, honestly, and I mean,
not that I'm calling Mark old, but he's been around a while.
No, absolutely. And truly, last year when he was doing that Invisible Woman book, it's like, why did it take 60 fucking years for there to be an Invisible Woman solo book? And it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And it's like, again, in the hands of a creator who has been around. I always, listen, man, my big bugaboo is ageism as I get older. And my thing is, you don't get wisdom as you get older, you get perspective. And sometimes it's, hey, I've been making a left turn when I should have made a right turn for 10 years. Maybe I should make a right turn this time. And you learn from your.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about the ageism thing is in fairness, it doesn't seem to work this way all the time. And there are mediums where people get better with age. Novelists very often will be producing the best work the older they get. Jazz music. I had an anthropology professor once who talked about the human brain as it gets older, and he was saying there's this perception that you lose creativity as you get older. But he was talking about jazz is about improvisation, and it's about bringing all of your influences and all the knowledge you've accumulated together to create new improvisation. And he was talking about a trumpeter who was in his, now trumpeting is, it's hard to trumpet when you're older because you lose wind. But the point was, this guy was better and better into his 90s almost, because he kept embracing the idea that he was improvising based on his experiences and all the stuff that's accumulated. It doesn't always seem to work that way in comics and stuff. I think because pop culture, people get stuck in pop culture ruts, but it should. I mean, you should be doing better work the older you get.
But also, I do believe now, with creator-owned stuff and the ability to cultivate an audience,
right,
and they're with you for the long run. And thankfully there are a lot of great examples of that. And I'm glad that a lot of creators that I've come to know in the 15 years of doing Word Balloon that now are approaching their senior years. I'm not talking about Mark. I'm talking about really senior years, sure, 60s and beyond. And they have the ability, and using your music analogy, I had heard of a classical cellist who was in his 90s and still practicing every day. And someone is like, "Maestro, like, why do you keep doing it?" He's like, "Because I'm finally starting to hear some improvement in my head." Yeah. And it's true, man. No, that's the thing. And again, like we said, authors and things like that. You know, Joe Kubert was firing on all cylinders until the day he dropped dead. Same thing with Will Eisner.
Yeah, Russ Heath was doing crazy good work, you know, in the 80s. And have you seen the stuff Ramona Fradon is doing at 93 years old? Holy shit! I mean,
I know, and that's great to hear, because, and really, I've had convention conversations with Ramona, and truly, what a talented woman. And
I think Amy Chu or somebody just posted a commission she had gotten from Ramona with like all of the Justice League Super Friends figures. I mean, it's flawless. It's so. I mean, and you can tell she's still getting joy and, you know, entertainment from what she's doing. I mean, it's so cool to see.
She's lovely.
The point I was making about the retro thing was, I was talking to Hank about that. I was like, you know, for me, if I'm the book I'd like to do, I agree, Scott.
Some stories are really sad.
But in comics, see, the thing is, they need to figure out how to get their own shit out in comics. And comics is, you know, you can find an avenue or a channel to get your work out if you want to prove that you still have the chops. And if you do that, you'll be okay. But what I was saying was, when I was talking to Hank Canals about, you know, because I'm always like, can you tell me what the perception, and editors will not. And he said to me, well, the only thing I've ever heard anybody saying it's not a negative is that, you know, you have an old school sensibility. And I was like, yeah, but that's because they only give me this old school shit to do, you know. And Scalped had just wrapped up. And I said, like, what I want to do, like, that's the kind of thing that and Hank was like, well, then go do it somewhere else. And, you know, which is true. And so I kind of stepped back. Like, I was doing like special project stuff for DC, like JLA NBA comics and Gatorade comics and Subway, you know, which paid all right. But boy, that stuff doesn't, you know, it is what it is.
Right. It serves the product rather than an audience. I'm with you, man.
It's advertising, basically. So I kind of made a conscious effort to step back and start reworking get back to creator-owned stuff. And Miles to Go is the first book that, you know, I'm trying to be a little more complex and trying to be a little more in depth with the relationships and sort of trying to be a little closer to what I feel is more my aesthetic than some of the stuff I've done. And that's one of several things that I've kind of been building slowly over the past couple of years, because I want to kind of redirect my own course. And that's not to go get work for DC and Marvel. I mean, you know, at all. But you know, even like Valiant, I did Savage at Valiant, which was a pretty good experience. I worked with Louis LaRosa, who's a freaking genius. And
that's great.
You know, and Savage.
While your Savage run was going on.
Yes, Savage was that was actually, not to get too into it, but that was actually something that I had run by Warren Simons when he was at Marvel 10 years earlier.
You know, and I remember you getting gigs with Warren at Marvel and stuff, and I was paying more attention to Warren's editorial choices.
Yeah. Warren left comics and called me out of the blue. Like literally, like it was like, hey, this is Warren Simons, and I'm like, you don't work in comics, and he's like, no, I'm the new editor-in-chief at Valiant. I was like, wait a minute. Valiant isn't a comic company anymore. it took us years to find, but finally he was like, you remember that idea you had? Wait, because anytime I would talk to him, he would always mention that idea because he liked the basic pitch. And so, he let Lewis and I do it. And then I did another Valiant thing. But those are great. And I like the fact that usually when I'm working for work for hire, I'm doing originals. I mean, I brought Savage. That was my title, everything. Yep. They own it, but I knew that, I'm giving it to them, and they've done a new version of it. That's fine. That's their prerogative. I kind of like seeing what they'll do with it. Killers, which was the next book I did. Again, it was editorial. The editor I was working with and I kind of created this thing out of some stuff that was, and I've just kind of come to accept it for whatever reason. Even at places like DC and stuff, I seem to end up doing original concepts or new takes. Okay, that's fine. That's, I don't have a long Batman run or Wolverine run in the middle of stuff. That's fine. But I want to continue to do my own stuff in my own voice with collaborators I want to work with, pursue outside media, and be in a position where, if I'm talking to DC, I haven't talked to Marvel for years, but I'm always talking to DC, or Valiant or whomever, I'm in a position where I can go, okay, is that something I'd be interested in doing, instead of being like, oh, you want me to write a Peyton Manning Gatorade comic for, okay. I mean, it's kind of fun, but it's like, I like to be too busy to do it.
No, I understand. And again, I think you have had your time at DC and Marvel with the things that you've done, but really you were part of that Image second wave that I do think you've proven yourself with creator-owned. And it seems to me that the market is more accepting of creator-owned. And thankfully, there are Aftershocks and Vault and some of these other publishers now that are looking for non-superhero fresh concepts. Yeah. And that's the thing. No, you've got a great track record with Crime Comics. That's why Miles to Go is a great book to look at. Not only
are they looking for non-superhero stuff, good luck trying to sell superheroes to anybody. I mean, they don't, which is kind of funny, because I do think, I don't know. Well, Alex Grecian and I have a kind of superhero adjacent thing that we had a publisher lined up for when the COVID stuff hit, that we were always kind of, it's a thing we really wanted to do. We were like, okay, we'll do it, but you leave us alone. We'll get the artist paid and do what we want to do. It was a superhero horror thing. It's back in limbo right now, probably for the better, because we can kind of still keep developing it. But man, it was all, when we show it to people, like, it was like literally publishers would go, well, can you get rid of the superhero aspect of, like, it's good as it is, but can we get costumes out of it and stuff, and even though it was kind of a postmodern, it's not about that at all. It's just,
well, that's why, despite the success of Umbrella Academy and The Boys, which are newer concepts,
right?
DC and Marvel have that shit sewed up. Yeah. And truly, I have said, people are very kind, young aspiring writers and artists, and it's like, hey, this is my idea. I'm trying to get in front of the big two, and it's a superhero idea, and I immediately say, they're filled up with superheroes. I go, if you really want to prove yourself, try and come up with a non-superhero thing. Or if your heart is really, because the other thing is, God, I've got this great Superman story that I'm dying to do. It's like, look, Superman is enough of a cipher that you can create your own version of Superman or Batman or the Flash or a lot of these basic comic tropes. And by all means, go. I have a great friend of mine who for 15 years has been boring me with his Nightwing story. And I'm like, look, make it about a Nightwing sort of character. God, I don't even remember. I think it's at Action Lab. They've got like a hero, and his concept is he's a dog of some sort. And it's like, okay,
terrier, is it?
I don't remember the name, and whatever. But again, it's like, if you're burning to do that, there's a way to get it done. But don't write that Spider-Man straight. Do the Kirkman example. Invincible was his, what if Spider-Man were raised by Superman? And it was great, but he disguised them enough that they were their own concepts. And as we know, Invincible's in development.
That's this thing Alex and I are doing is based on a superhero trope. Each major company has a hero like this. we independently had come up with sort of a postmodern take that we knew we were never going to pitch Stray, right? By that's Vito Del Sante's book.
Yes.
But we were never going to pitch the DC or Marvel versions of that character because if they liked it, by the time they were done with it, it wasn't going to be what we wanted it to be. So we were like, okay, well, we have to do this on our own because then we don't have to, cater to what anybody else does. And the irony of the superhero thing is that there's a ton of foreign investment money that's been dumped into comics in the past few years, which Valiant's a good example. They have foreign investors come in and spend a whole lot of money. That money was generated by the success of Marvel and the Marvel universe as much as anything. And a lot of those people weren't involved in Marvel's backing, because that's what happened with Marvel. They had outside funding come in and support the studio. So they're like, well, where's our Marvel? Where's our so Valiant can go, oh, we've got all these. This is just like Superman and Spider-Man and whatever. And then suddenly there's millions of dollars of it. So it's kind of weird because there is still this perception internationally that's if you're really going to make a lot of money with comic book stuff, it's got to be this interconnected Marvel style thing, which even DC can't figure out. So, but look
at Anthony.
You also see some of these publishers that have launched and clearly have some backing. If you go back and look at when they initially launched, you'll hear them talk about, well, we're going to have an interconnected universe or this or that because that's part of the selling point. And then maybe that doesn't really happen because it's harder to sell comics with superheroes unless they're Marvel or DC.
But also, Anthony Johnson, and I can't remember if it was called The Last Run or whatever, but it became Atomic Blonde.
It was The Coldest City.
Coldest City. Thank you, buddy. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And I love Anthony. Great writer and stuff. Rucka with the old guy. I mean,
there's no H in his name. It's Anthony.
I said Anthony. I just said it quickly.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's another. So The Coldest City was an Oni book.
That out. Go on now.
The Coldest City was an Oni book. Andy's, Ciudad was an Oni project.
Yes, Andy. Ciudad, yes, indeed. Absolutely. And did that become a film? I don't know if that became a film.
It's the Netflix film. That it was the Chris Hemsworth Netflix film that was. And
then also Victor Santos, Polar, became a great Netflix movie.
Well,
I mean, but I was going to use Rucka with the old guard, obviously, right. and there's a little Powers element to old guard and immortality or whatever. But I mean, they're not conventional superhero stories, and that's the great thing. I mean, certainly going back to Road to Perdition and stuff, again from 15 and 20 years ago.
So the Atomic Blonde. So the producer on Atomic Blonde is Eric Gitter, who I've worked with for 15 years and was listening to him as he was traveling to Budapest and having dinner with Charlize and blah blah blah, and they cut a trailer for that, and they tested the trailer with same trailer, and they tested it with The Coldest City. Was it The Coldest City? Is that?
Yeah, it was The Coldest City. As soon as you said it, you're absolutely right. Yes.
They tested it with the title The Coldest City.
Oh, for the title. Go on.
Yeah, and they tested it, same trailer with Atomic Blonde, and it tested like 40% higher, the exact same trailer with Atomic Blonde. Because when he told me they were going to call it Atomic Blonde, I'm like, are we maybe underestimating the audience? And he's like, dude, here's how this happened,
Hollywood works, focus groups. But no, it's fascinating. And again, and that's another reason why, sadly, this COVID period is interesting, watching these Netflix movies and Apple Plus and all these other things explode. And it's everything is changing, Clay. I'm stating the obvious, but it's a very, very interesting time. I wish it was under happier circumstances, but it is spawning interesting creativity and also interesting solutions to the current limitations.
Yeah, Thomas points out, they retitled Ciudad as Extraction, which was the number one movie on Netflix for quite a while,
yes.
And they've been, Eric Gitter and Andy had been talking about, that was one of those things for 5-6 years I've been listening to, the Russos, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, and then then it happened, but
no, man. Or Joe, my buddy, in fact, he emailed me during this conversation, Joe Henderson, the showrunner for Lucifer, and man, I am so proud of him and his people and that crew and cast, because that TV show was on the bubble at Fox. All 3 seasons it was at Fox. Thank God Netflix saves it, and they got another 3 seasons. They're in the midst of their 5th season, and they're going to do one more season after it.
Was Mike Costa writing for Lucifer?
He was, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
absolutely, man.
The other thing about the COVID thing that some people don't want to hear, but it's absolutely true, is that because of Marvel and DC kind of bottlenecking and kind of winnowing down, the slack is being picked up by other publishers. And I'm telling you, good shops that I know are doing better business right now than they've done in a long time. I talked to a guy who rents space to a shop in Missouri, and he was telling me, yeah, they want to double the size of their shop. They're doing so well right now, you know. And people are like, oh, people go, oh, DC and Marvel are cutting back. The industry's dead. Well, no, this is the problem. People are going to spend their money. They want to read their comics, and shops need to make their money. So, you know, hopefully, if DC and Marvel can come back in whatever form they're going to come back in, but hopefully more people are realizing this is more interesting anyway.
And further, again, creators are seeing the limitations of the direct market.
Oh, yeah.
And finding other ways. And truly, I'm so thrilled that Ed has come back, Brubaker, and talked a lot about this on Word Balloon. And we're likely going to have a 3rd conversation before the year is up with his next book. But truly, cutting that deal with Marcos Martin and Panel Syndicate and doing the Friday book with Marcos, and then, you know, standing by Pulp and deciding, you know something, I'm not going to do monthly magazines anymore. I am purely doing graphic novels. And a lot of stores are going to have to contend with that. And I think I hope that works in their business model, because it's something that I felt has been necessary ever since the 20-page and 22-page comic. They've slowly been jacking up the price. And
there's a lot of, you know, we're seeing, when I was at Image and you know, Eric Stevenson and I used to kick around even after I left working for them. Eric was always trying to like, I remember at one point, this was terrifying. He was talking about, well, what if Image just cut down to 8 titles a month, you know, and we focused on these 8 titles, you know? We talked about what if there was a free issue? What if you treated an issue like a single, and you treated the graphic novel like the album? And so you released a dirt cheap single issue that was then included in the graphic novel. And so, you know, or if it wasn't chapter 1, it was a story, you know, it was an introductory story to the concept, and you sell it for $1. Now, shops hate selling dollar comics because the profits aren't there. But,
right.
But again, it's like, do we do 4 digital issues in 4 weeks and then the next week drop a trade? I mean, there are all kinds of things that, because of the way things have been set up, people haven't even investigated that. Now people, I think, are more willing, you know, at Image, talk about The Walking Dead. I was there when The Walking Dead exploded,
right?
PR and marketing, and it wasn't me, it was the book. But the book solicited initially, it was like 7,000 copies maybe out of the gate, something like that, which was, for a black and white book, it was okay. But immediately we knew it was a pretty good book, and it was generating buzz from people who had read it. Well, the problem in comics is if you do 7,000, people are ordering the 3rd issue before they've read the 1st issue. So there's always a huge drop for issue 2. And sometimes you'll see a small bounce in between for issue 3 if people respond, but there's only so many available of issue 2. And it's a self-defeating thing. Well, the numbers skewed, they bumped in a weird way right off the bat. And so I think it was Eric's idea. It might have been Kirkman's, because Kirkman is always thinking of things. But that was where we were like, okay, we'll drop issue 7 on the same day we drop the trade for the first 6 issues. And that way, anybody who's heard about it will pick up the trade and then the 7th issue. And I'm telling you, dude, that day was crazy. Like, the book sold through the roof. Issue 7 flew off the shelves, and they never looked back. I mean, long before the TV show, that book was generating hundreds of thousands.
Got you.
And that was an example of, like, Robert always being willing to kind of try shit, and Eric trying to find a new method. Now, it kind of became a thing they did a lot. And it was a $9.99 trade. So it was like a cheaper trade.
I remember it. I think that's a smart move as well.
But it's a smart move as long as you know you're going to be producing multiple volumes and you can make money when you raise your price. But yeah, man, retailers, I mean, they couldn't get, it was crazy, the response. And it was a combination of a book people had heard about, a good book. Robert made damn sure that book got out on time. But again, that was we really need, if we can't lose the direct market. We've got to figure out how to make the two things work together.
Absolutely. But again, it is a different market than it was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's something and it's been a recurring subject when I talk to creators. And should I ever talk to executives at DC or Marvel, DC and Marvel, they are the leaders. They subscribe to the same, monthly magazine format for 20 years, not recognizing everything else that was happening comics adjacent, whether it was Kickstarter, Panel Syndicate, obviously the YA graphic novel market. And it's like all this shit has been bubbling up, and you got to kind of look around every now and then and take your head out of the tunnel and see what's happening in the forest around you. I'll
tell you this though, John, you say that, but so when Image rejuvenated, and Walking Dead became this runaway success, and the Walking Dead trades were outselling everything monthly.
Yes.
And making hundreds of thousands of dollars for the creators. Before the TV show, when the TV show came out, it just went haywire. But
exactly,
I remember having Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey had done
Phonogram.
It wasn't. I think it was the Wicked and the Divine. Anyway, they had reported in public. They had said we sold 100,000 copies of the first trade, and I had lunch with a couple DC editors and executives once when I was in Burbank, and they knew I was tied into the still not really publishing with Image, but tied into Image creators and close to the company, and in communication with Kieran and Jamie. And I kind of realized that part of the reason for the lunch was they had been trying to crunch the numbers and didn't believe that the book had sold what the creators had reported it had sold, because the actual information is more limited than you think. They're looking at BookScan, they're looking at Diamond, they're trying to figure it out. And they kind of just flat told me like, hey, we heard that, but, and I mean, I promise you it was true. I remember talking to Kieran about it. And again, if they hadn't made those numbers public, I wouldn't say it, but because they had made them public and they were like, well, we're not, Vertigo, Image became the new Vertigo, and Vertigo couldn't launch at Image numbers, even for average Image books.
Yep.
Now, a lot of that was creative malaise, frankly. But yeah, well, the SAG era kind of was a carryover from Walking Dead.
We'll address that in a second, Len, but it is a good question. Forgive me, I didn't realize it was a question. I thought it was a statement. But continue.
Anyway, but that was a fact. And again, DC was hearing things they couldn't figure out and trying to figure out why they weren't working by looking, which is what they should be doing, is by looking at Image and saying, are they bullshitting? Are we not figuring out the numbers correctly? And I think a lot of that did have to do with them trying to figure out what the hell was wrong with Vertigo, which was really just about a lack of direction, a lack of identity. I mean,
absolutely. All of that. Yes.
I mean, Karen Berger did wonders in the early years, but nobody can sit at the top of an imprint or a company for that long without losing some mojo. And I think that's what had happened. And I don't think they responded correctly when they fired her with the new directions they took. But Image, I promise you, Image was one of the big pains in their ass. Dan, those guys would look and say, well, why are these? In fact, I remember someone telling me, Dan had once said, Image should be the place where people take ideas we don't want. I mean, we should be getting the good ideas, or that's how our stuff should work. Well, when you're taking the parts, all you're offering is a page rate. And for a long time, nothing was coming out of Vertigo or DC. Warner was killing things rather than develop them. Now that's changed.
It has,
because of the success of things like The Walking Dead.
Certainly.
There was a time when DC wouldn't hire Vertigo creators. Jason Aaron and Tony Moore were working at Vertigo when I started doing DC stuff. And I remember talking to my editor and going, you've got to get Jason Aaron doing DCU work. This guy, and also Tony. I'm like, Tony's a genius. And my editor said, DCU doesn't hire Vertigo creators. If Vertigo creators want to work at DC, they need to go do Marvel work, and then we'll hire them at DC.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, once Jason, who was in he was at Vertigo, and then once he went to Marvel, well, then you see Scott Lemire and all these. Yeah. It starts to change a little bit because what a stupid. I remember at the time going, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So,
hey, Allison. And yes, Paul Levitt's leaving meant the Vertigo deal became crap. Yes.
I can't speak to that. I had my issues at DC when Levitz was there too, because of some cronyism. But again, it's all part of the. I'm not complaining about anything that's ever happened. That when you are working for someone else and they own all the stuff, you either play by their rules and figure out how to navigate them, or you don't. You can't sit around and whine about what didn't happen.
Right.
I can do it.
Hey, buddy, I'm doing it in broadcasting.
Yeah.
It's God bless. I don't blame any direct management that I dealt with in Chicago radio. And I know a lot of decisions were just corporate decisions, and that's fine. But that's why I'm really glad that I've got this digital platform. I am doing the show I've always wanted to do. And people always ask me, well, aren't you going to go for another radio job? And it's like, not necessarily. Just as you said about potentially going to DC or Marvel, it's like, well, if they want me to do something that I find interesting, we can talk. But am I going to be, Jimmy Schmo, the traffic reporter again at a radio station? I don't think so. It's not what I'm interested in doing. And I have opportunities to do the broadcasting things I want to do online. And thankfully, because of the graciousness of my audience and also my sponsors, I'm able to do that. But I do want to ask, and unless you had another point to make, I was
going to say there's always that other element. Like there are people at DC still, guys like Ben Abernathy and Jamie Rich, who I've known for years, respect a lot of and love, and they're characters I do love. I would always be willing, if I talk to them, and now granted there's things I want to do. I know they don't, I want to do this. Well, that doesn't work. For me. I know what I really want to do, and I know that I can make it work, but I'll drop a bug in their ear, But if Ben calls me and is like, hey, you want to do a short story and an anthology, I'll do it. I'm not, and I'd love to get a foot.
But that's a short time commitment. And again, just like, hey man, you mentioned Alex before, Grecian, and look at all the great novel success he's had. Yeah. While he was banging his head, with his comics and stuff.
Well, and trust me, and there's always, you do look at Tom King and you do look at these guys and you go, okay, well, there is, if you've got an ego at all, you go, okay, there is a way to work within the confines of the system and make stuff work. But, had a conversation with Axel Alonso when he was still at Marvel, and I wasn't doing anything for Marvel. That's one of the things about being a freelancer. You're like, Axel calls. Nobody's giving you work there, and he's not even offering you work. And then he sits there and tells you, and you're like, he was telling me how one of the books at Marvel that reset everything was Fraction's
Hawkeye?
Yeah, Hawkeye. He was like, man, he said, nobody wanted to do that book. He said, Hawkeye had failed so many times. He said, there was so much resistance. He said, we went out on a limb. And of course you read the book and you're like, well, obviously, why wouldn't you do this book? And Axel probably doesn't get credit for being there when this happened, but that definitely led to Wade and Somni doing Daredevil and Captain America and kind of putting a new spin on things. Great books.
100%, man.
But, and I'm sitting there, because you think you know everything and you're like, well, why wouldn't you do that Hawkeye book? It's fucking amazing. The art Fraction is at the top of his game. But that's the thing, you got to navigate that. And man, if you can get through, like how Tom got through and how Fraction got through. And Wade, I understand to some degree.
Wade's got the decades of behind that he's a trusted name and proven guy. But no, you're right, King. And also, God, really Tom Taylor right now. And like you mentioned earlier with Injustice. Oh, yeah. And Tom's having a great time. God, we mentioned Injustice, and certainly Deceased is a fun book, but Suicide Squad has never been better. Never.
Well, Deceased is funny too, because when Tom was talking about it, and Abernathy, I remember I emailed Abernathy, and I was like, dude, this deceased book, holy shit, it's going to be huge. And and I could tell from Ben's response, he was like, there was resistance, and he was like, oh, I hope you're right, and I was like, because I'm like, it's a no-brainer. It's like sometimes everybody's so close to the situation and they have to navigate so much shit that I don't think they can step back and realize this is a pretty sure, this is gonna. And I think Ben thought it would work, but Ben is a veteran of every war, so he was
Sure.
hedging his bets. But I mean, I thought when I heard it announced, I'm like, well, shit, there goes Tom's gonna sell, and it did. It worked, and it was good.
And Len earlier asked, what age are we in right now? Here, I'm going to bring it back up. He's like, we had the two eras at Image, the Saga era. Actually, I can think of 3 eras of Image. Actually, 4 if you go to the original intent of the original creators. But what era of Image are we in right now? I'll let you answer. If you've got an answer, Clay, I'll do it. But I have an answer as well ready to go.
I think we're in the so I mentioned earlier that like the catchphrase I kept using when I was there and we were trying to sell, because retailers resisted a lot of these books at Image initially because they would complain that there was no what's the word they would use? There was no identity. Early 90s, the Image books, they were all variations of the same stuff. You liked it.
Well, they were veterans that had already proven themselves as writers and artists. Yeah.
Right. So then that kind of collapsed in on itself. And then Valentino took some chances, did some black and white books. To Jim's credit, he took some chances, but it wasn't like he didn't quite commit to, he started a direction. Then when Larson took over as publisher, Eric Stevenson actually was the guy driving that train. That's when I worked there. I mean,
Stevenson was doing the heavy lifting while Larson had the publisher title.
Eric Larson was more than happy to trust Stevenson's judgment. And Jim was too. I mean, like Hawaiian Dick was not a book Valentino was all that into until it succeeded. But Eric Powers had come out then, and he had thought if we could get this book going, we could, he saw what it could have been, which it didn't quite become, but it did, it was fine. But
just fine. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think when we were talking about we can become the HBO of comics, I think kind of Image is like HBO is now. It's the thing that started everything that's going on right now, with a couple of heavy hitters that are always going to show up and punch in their weight class, and then some things that are going to kind of mix in with the Aftershock book. I mean, like this is a book that 15 years ago, Image, or 10 years ago, Image might have been the only place we really could have done this book with the freedom we've had. I don't think Dark Horse has done a good job of keeping up with that because they relied so heavily on licensed books for so long, and Hellboy, that they weren't tending their garden, so to speak. But what Image is now is kind of the guiding light for a number of smaller publishers, none of whom have the same deal Image does, but in terms of content, and also understanding that good comics with good concepts have the potential to be exploited in other media, which is not a bad thing. It just generates more income for everybody and makes the environment better for new, fresh ideas. Because Hollywood is like, well, shit, these are new ideas. That's what they like about comics. It's not rehashed. It's not. And if you really pay attention to the books that get optioned and picked up by TV and stuff in comics, it's very often not stuff that seems like obvious, TV pitches and stuff. Because that's the criticism you hear all the time. But it's like, not really. I mean, look at The Boys. I mean, who would have thought that was a TV pitch, I mean,
right. And also, again, The Boys benefits even more now from a TV standpoint because we're used to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and suddenly
they play off
and I think
people are familiar with the language.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's why I even say Scott Snyder's Watchmen, I think, plays much better now than it did in 2009 because people understand the language and people understand the tropes from a general audience standpoint. I understand it. I'm not saying it's a perfect movie.
First of all, it's not Scott Snyder, so don't throw Scott under the bus.
Oh, excuse me, Zach. Sorry, Scott. Yes, Zack Snyder. Yes, indeed. Sorry about that, Scott.
I've got my own hangups with the Watchmen movie, but the TV show was great. But
and I think the TV show is exceptional as well. But anyway, no, how you describe the new era of Image, I would agree. And also, again, I think Image is sorting itself out in a different way because of what's been happening even pre and post pandemic.
Right.
But I'm glad you mentioned, you're absolutely right in terms of creatively. Yeah, HBO has figured it out, and now the streamers are taking the HBO model and moving forward. And certainly the Vaults, the Valiants, the Aftershocks, Ahoy with humor, I think they're all finding their way. And
TKO.
TKO, absolutely. Good Lord, yes, TKO. I'm glad you mentioned them. I got to talk to those guys. I haven't done that yet. I'm with you on all that stuff. And again,
for that matter, the environment that those books have created has made it possible for crowdfunding to be an option for people as well, as long as they don't fuck it up.
Honestly, Clay, I'm glad you brought that up because, and I said this, I was talking about this. I think it wasn't even on Rob's show, Burnett, but he was doing a private Zoom with a bunch of people that are part of his community, and we were just talking about Boom and the Keanu Reeves Kickstarter and everything. And I gotta say, and I really want your opinion. I used to be with the independent creators that are like, well, I'm not cool with a publisher using Kickstarter. I've really done an about face and realized, something, it's a free market. It might bring in readers that are Keanu fans that never would have considered comics. And also, watching a big budget movie is not precluding me from watching a small budget movie. And I think comic fans and creators have to take that same notion and not worry about the likely million that Keanu's going to make and Boom from their Kickstarter. You got to run your own race. You got to trust in your concept, and you got to do the work. It's no different than what I'm doing online and worrying about what ABC or NBC or any of the major networks are doing. It's like, do your thing. I'm going to run my own race. Jesse Owens always said that. So your thoughts on that whole thing?
Well, as regards publishers crowdfunding, I don't have a problem with a publisher doing anything they can, but you also, if you look at some of the people who did that initially in terms of publishing, now there are some publishers who had no foothold, had no money to pay creators, and some of that shit was, and in fact, if we were off the air, we could talk about publisher we both might be familiar with, regionally speaking, who to me was just taking advantage of people who could have done the damn thing themselves, and taking a cut they didn't earn. That's one thing. But then when I see, like, for instance, Top Cow starts doing it, well, I've known Matt Hoggins for a long time, and he wants to do good books, but he doesn't want to do anything that isn't going to work, right? He's not, and like if you talk to a guy like Matt, it's the avenues he's figured out to sell comics. Like, he's doing like these erotic comics that you don't hear anything about because they're not in shops and stuff.
Amazing. Go on.
Sells the shit out of those books through other channels. It's a very simple, like, it's not working here, but people want it. So he sells those things on Amazon like crazy. Right. So when I see like a guy like Matt, or who kind of runs Top Cow, taking that angle, my first thought is, okay, what's his perspective on this? What's he thinking? Well, a lot of it is just due to the fact that the direct market doesn't work. It doesn't. Fans aren't ordering comics.
Yeah.
Retailers are ordering comics.
Right.
Yeah. So if your retailer doesn't order your comic, nobody cares what you think or want. At least with crowdfunding, if you're an established publisher, you can reach the audience directly.
Cultivate.
Yes. And understand, and for instance, with Bad Karma, which was the first thing we kickstarted, we did very well with it. Relatively speaking, I mean, it was a $35, 200-page book. We're not, just so you know, we're not going to break the bank. I mean, people charge $35 for 20-page comics on Kickstarter. It was a hardcover, 200-page book. Had a lot, Jonathan Hickman designed the cover, had all kinds of great creators involved. And we did well. And we were pretty sure that through Kickstarter, we sold more copies of a third cover of a $35, 200-page hardcover than we would have through Diamond. But I was in, I don't know where I was, some show somewhere, Seattle, we'll say. And I ran into Nick Barucci, Dynamite, who I've known for years and years. And just showed it to him. I mean, it was nothing more, I think, than, oh, here's the book. And he was like, oh, you guys just kickstarted. And yeah, he said, you want us to distribute this for you? Like as a favor. And Nick's taken some heat lately for some of his associations and stuff, but he's the kind of guy who, if you know him and you're a friend of his, he's not really tied into what's going on everywhere. And I mean, look, I've had my own troubles with some of that stuff, but I didn't ask Nick. I didn't even approach him with that. It was a favor he did for us. And the other guys, which were Alex and Seth and Jeremy, were a little resistant initially. How much are they going to take? Blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Again, we had already sold, I don't know, 1,000 copies or whatever we sold. Dynamite sold like 700 and some copies of a $35 200-page hardcover that had already been crowdfunded and delivered. And if you look at numbers, that's really successful for a book like that, and it was like, okay, accidentally, we kind of figured out one of the ways people could do this stuff. You fund it with the audience, you get it in their hands. We overprinted, we didn't make any money out of the gate, and we could have if we just kept to the margins, but I still have, a couple boxes of the Bad Karma hardcover. And that was one of the issues. We're like, Jesus, we've got a lot of these left, which I don't know what we thought. We weren't going to distribute them really online or anything. We were selling them at shows and shit. But
sure.
So Nick offered to do that. All we had to do was, ship them to him, and we did, it really helped us out and got the book in more people's hands. And it's like we resisted it because it's like it's just in the nature of creators and publishers and everything to kind of resist any new channel or something that
outside the norm. Yes.
Yeah. And I was the one who was kind of pushing for us to. Now, granted, I've known Nick longer than I knew him pretty well, and I mean,
okay.
Reputations are reputations, but I knew that in terms of just being a loyal guy and an honest guy, he never bullshitted me about anything.
Okay.
When I talk about working for Dynamite at all, it's like he was never going to bullshit me about how much money I might or might not make. Which to me, I can't complain if I'm not making any money if a publisher told me going in, here's the deal. This is what you're going to make,
No, and I agree. And I think some of the complaints about the Boom Kickstarter thing, it's like, look, that was the contract you signed. And yeah, you can complain. But again, I don't think.
How does it hurt? How does it hurt the industry? How does it hurt creators? How does it hurt anybody if any project, through whatever means, succeeds beyond what it would have succeeded if they had just dumped it on the direct market? I mean, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't, it's just, it forces people to, again, examine how they're doing things. And again, I'm not saying we cut ties and abandon, but shit, man, we all know, and God, I understand retail. I know retailers, a lot of retailers are struggling and they get freaked out by digital sales and online sales and everything. But I will never believe that a broader audience with more distribution channels is going to be bad for shops that specialize in an item. I mean, how did any of us find comic shops? It's because we bought comics somewhere else first, and we fell in love with the medium and found a place that specialized in it. So, and there just aren't enough shops. There never have been enough shops to cover the country. There just aren't. There and not good shops. There's a ton of good shops. There's a lot of great shops. There's a lot of bad shops. There's a lot of small shops. There's a lot of shops operating on small margins that don't carry anything but Marvel and DC. And there are metropolitan areas that don't have access to comic shops that have never. I mean, it's not like there was some period when every corner there was, even in the 90s when, everybody was overpaying for 10 copies of whatever was coming out. There were not a billion comic shops everywhere. I mean, the college town I went to had one gaming comic shop that served 60,000 people.
Wow.
And they still do, I mean,
yeah.
It's a different one, but man, you'd hear that all the time from people. I can't, and asking people to drive 45 minutes a week to go to a shop or whatever. I mean, I don't know. We just have to accept that getting shit into more people's hands is going to be good for everybody in the industry. And the industry will always, I think, find a way to try to support the direct market. And, you may become a place that specializes in physical objects and, fetish objects, or high-end objects and back issues or what have you, or merchandise. You may not, you may not be selling 700 individual copies of Wolverine every month, but maybe you'll sell 50 copies of a comic shop direct, anthology or what have you. I mean, there's things change, and look, comic shops have hung on a lot longer than record shops hung on.
Straight.
There's a reason for that. I mean, people want to be in the shops, and they want to browse, and they want to talk to people who can.
Yes,
want to talk about that shit.
It's part of the culture, and again, hopefully, I mean, I'm glad that stores are open again. I hope that again, we eventually, and I know eventually we will come out of this, and when we do, live events will come back and things like that. But in the meantime, all the creators and all the publishers are finding these different avenues, and I don't see it as a bad thing. I really, really don't.
And I know that we're running into Bendis Tapes area here in terms of the time, but I will say, well, I mean, Bendis Tapes part one of 30, but I will say that here's the other thing is it's like running a restaurant. It's a bitch. It's a hard industry to succeed in. You're not entitled to anything. You're not guaranteed anything. You have got to work. People who own successful restaurants work their freaking asses off to do it, right?
My father did it for 30 years.
Yeah. You don't succeed relying on people who supply your food to
or anything. No, you got to have a good product, and you got to be consistent and serving your people. Go on.
So I've got a shop locally that I go to, Elite Comics, which most of the creators in the area, Chris Burnham's different because he's a freak, but most of us, if we're buying comics, we'll go into Elite. That's where we're connected to the shop. I mean, a lot of us were connected to that shop before we were in comics. Myself and Jason Aaron, and I met Jeremy Hahn in Elite Comics when he was doing a self-published book. Well, the guy who runs it, William Binderup, is not only is he dedicated. First of all, he loves it. He's cultivated a crowd, a loyal audience that when this shit hit, they were doing everything they could to help him and pick him up and figure out how to lend a hand. But he's also super active in the community. He's got cosplayers at local hospitals. He's got a heavy role in Planet Comic-Con, which has turned into one of the bigger regional shows. When Free Comic Book Day, I would hear retailers complain endlessly about Free Comic Book Day, like what they're spending money on. If you go to Elite, which is in a strip mall, it's not a huge store. On Free Comic Book Day, there's a line out the block from people who never go into a comic shop except for that day, because the way he's got sidewalk sales going on, he's got local media involved, and it becomes an event that every event is like that. The guy, he's not sitting around, whining and complaining about what's not working for him. He's figuring out, there's things that obviously don't make him happy and that he's concerned about, which is understandable. But, he's figured out how to make Chris Powell, who I was thinking about a long time ago, about the guy who worked at Lone Star, who now works at Diamond.
Okay.
Who's a big tiki guy. When Chris was at Lone Star and I was dealing with retailers.
Sure.
Lone Star was owned by Buddy Rogers, who's an old school conservative. I mean, this is a guy who, when Miracle Man came out in the 80s, wrote an editorial about how horrible it was to see childbirth in the comics. So that's the guy who ran it. But Chris was the general manager, and it was a successful chain. First comic shop I ever went to as a kid. I would be on this retailer's message board, and as an example, Barnes & Noble had an exclusive Spider-Man hardcover from Marvel. And you would have thought the world was ending because this thing was only available from Barnes & Noble, and comic shops couldn't get it at a discount. And, and I remember Chris saying, well, it doesn't do me any good to whine about this. He's like, we've got an account. We've got a discount at Barnes & Noble. So I'm just going to go in and buy 10 copies of this through our Barnes & Noble discount, mark it up a little. My margins are small, but I'll have it for him and we'll sell it. He's like, that's all you can do. That's how you have to approach all this shit. I mean, because you can't complain about the future because it's not slowing down. You just got to figure out how to adapt and make it work. And I think it can happen,
I agree, buddy.
I'm off my soapbox.
No, it was all good. Seriously. Hey, guess what? You just created a 2-part word balloon.
Oh,
sorry. So you're almost in Bendis territory. But honestly, Clay, this was great. I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your friendship, and I always have. And you're a smart, funny guy, and I love your writing. I'm thrilled that Miles to Go is coming out. You were kind enough to give me the first issue. It looks amazing and reads amazing. And if you love crime comics, everybody knows that's one of my favorite genres. This is a great addition to the genre. And yes, Len, I agree. This has been excellent. I'm always glad that Len is watching, and he's a good friend of the show, and he does an amazing podcast on YouTube as well that people should definitely check out. Englishman in San Diego, or SDCC. Very cool stuff. So looking forward to that. And then again, where can people find? And now I'm blanking on what it was called. The book that you were going to do with Matthew Fox and everything.
Oh, Billy Smoke.
Billy Smoke, yeah.
Macroverse is the name of the app, which I've sort of reposted. Time has not been my friend lately, but I'll repost their posts on Instagram occasionally. They've been trying to push it pretty well. I'll pin a link to it on Twitter.
Send me the link to tonight, and I'll put it in the description of the audio episode and the video episode for that matter.
Yeah, I think people. There's some really cool stuff that people are doing there. It's creator owned, and again, it's in terms of the readability factor. It's and I'm not just saying this because I'm doing something with them, because I had talked to people over the years about phone apps and stuff. It's to me, it's the closest to an actual comic reading experience where the experience is accentuated. They break it all down. They reformat everything. It's in fact, I probably would have put the old Hawaiian Dick stuff up there if I could find the art with separate layers for the lettering, but I'm not sure Steven knows where any of that is. But anyway, Macroverse, Billy Smoke. I'll try to. It's always hard to link phone shit, but I will say if you just Google Macroverse, you can find a lot of information about it. So.
All right. Excellent, man. Well, seriously, good luck with Miles to Go. And, God, let's not wait. The last time we did talk was Whistling Skull.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's probably like 7 years ago or something like that. Let's not wait 7 years for you to come back and do another one.
This was the year I was going to get back on the convention circuit and try to hit because I've been off the circuit for a couple of years, so that didn't happen. But hopefully in the next year or so, we'll be able to get back into in person, and I can at least get down to Chicago or over.
That'd be great. Absolutely, and regardless, I'm glad we're able to do this online. So hang out for a second. I know I've kept you awake, and I'm not yawning anymore.
No, I'm going to be up all night working. So,
all right, very good.
Hey, John. Also, let me say, I don't know how you're staying awake at all, because the content you've been spitting out since all this shit hit is insane. Every time I go onto Facebook, I see you talking to Jeff or Gabe or somebody about limits or whatever. So
hey man, I'll even say it on the air, and you don't have to commit, but. Gabe and I were saying, hey, Clay might be a good addition if he's interested in talking Outer Limits with us and stuff.
Hey, don't hesitate to hit me up anytime you've got something going on, because it's way easier than doing work.
Well, there you go, man. And hey, late night, probably around the same time, maybe actually an hour later. We may not start till 11:30 our time, but that's because I've been doing all these planning meetings for Baltimore Comic-Con that I'm involved with. And a little teaser, everybody. You expect some great content from Word Balloon tying into Baltimore in the days and weeks ahead, and the actual convention, the 23rd through the 25th. But man, if you can join us in 2 days, right here on Word Balloon Live as we go to the Outer Limits, I know Gabe would love to have you.
What episode are you guys talking about?
Obit, OBIT. You missed two great ones with David McCallum's Six Finger, which everybody adores, and Martin Landau's Man Who Never Been Born. Great time travel story.
I dropped in briefly. That's for that, but yeah. Okay, well, maybe so. So
yeah, if you're interested, or even kind of scan the episodes and see what you think. But
I want to be on screen talking. I don't want to be, leaving little comments like, come on, man.
No, and truly, hey, Allison Baker, Dean Haspiel, all the creators that chimed in on tonight's chat, and always Ed Cato chiming in late and stuff. Great, Len, the Englishman, absolutely, seriously, means a lot that everybody's watching. We had a great audience that hung through our discussion, and that was great. The one jerk on Twitch, what are you going to do? But anyway, thanks a lot, Claymore. I appreciate it, and I'm going to pop you out right now and thank everybody again for watching. This is going to be a great week. I'm not going to have anything tomorrow night, but for Thursday, it's going to be the rewatch of Star Trek Lower Decks, or the review of the latest episode with Franco and Mitch. And then late night, Gabe Hardman and I, To the Outer Limits. We'll see if Andy Parks joins us. We'll see if Jeff Parker joins us. We'll see if Clay Moore joins us. But we'll be talking about Obit. That's on Thursday. Friday night, Chuck Austin. Remember Chuck Austin from a few years back? He's got a brand new comic book and is willing to talk, and that's terrific. Chuck's not only had an interesting career in comics, but also in animation. He was a big part of King of the Hill for several years. You might remember the sci-fi comedy Tripping the Riff. That was Chuck's big animation show back in the day. But he is back with a new comic book, and I'm excited to talk to him. It's been a long time since he's been on Word Balloon, and I look forward to his bumps and aches and pains working for DC and Marvel during those early 2000 years. So look forward to that on Friday. Until then, as always, stay safe.